My name is Molly, and I work as a public servant in a small town. 8 years ago, I married my husband, Michael, who is also a public servant. However, since our jobs require us to move frequently, we live apart. We don't have any children. Every evening at 9 p.m., I get a WhatsApp message from my husband. It usually says something like, "I have a meeting tonight, too." I reply, "You have a hard time every night. When will you be able to come home?" His response is always, "I don't know, unsure," and that's the end of our conversation. This has been the only kind of talk we've had in our 8 years of marriage. We've never lived together, so people might think ours is just a marriage of convenience, but in our line of work, this isn't unusual. We're both federal civil servants, specifically soldiers. We get transferred to different military bases every 2 to 3 years, and each time, our living situation changes. 2 years ago, during one of our WhatsApp chats, I asked, "Should I buy an apartment in Jackson, Mississippi, my hometown?" Michael replied, "That sounds great. I hope I get stationed in Jackson, too." "Of course you should, we are a couple, after all." I teased him, "Why are you denying it? Are we really a couple?" His reply was short, "Why are you saying such silly things? Still at work. See you tomorrow, bye." 2 years ago, I went ahead and bought the apartment in Jackson, where my parents live. I plan to live there even after I retire. If Michael ever gets stationed in Jackson, we plan to live together. One day, instead of a WhatsApp message, Michael called me, which was unusual. He said, "Hey, my parents are planning a trip from Eugene, Oregon, to Kentucky. When they pass through Mississippi, can they stay at your apartment?" I agreed and said, "Sure, Michael, it's been a while since I last saw them." He simply responded, "Thank you, bye." Even though the phone call was rare, Michael's response was cold. I realized I hadn't seen my in-laws since our wedding, which felt like ages ago. Since I'm based in Mississippi, Michael moves around the country, and his parents live in Eugene, Oregon. We hardly get a chance to meet. Excited to finally see my in-laws, I offered to show them around my hometown, Jackson. When they arrived, we exchanged greetings. "Molly, long time no see, how have you been?" they asked. I replied, "I'm doing well, thank you." Michael's parents apologized for not meeting up more often because Michael lives alone most of the time. I reassured them, saying, "Don't worry, we're like air to each other." That's exactly what it felt like. Michael and I were like air to each other, neither close nor distant. Since they were visiting Mississippi, I offered to take them to see the Windsor ruins, a famous site in the area. As we toured the ruins, they commented on how impressive they were, comparing them to the Shelton McMurphy Johnson house in Eugene. My father-in-law was comparing the Windsor ruins in Mississippi with the Shelton McMurphy Johnson house from their hometown, Eugene, Oregon. He admired both places and mentioned that parts of the house in Eugene had been damaged in an earthquake 6 years ago, and the unrepaired sections had to be demolished. "That's a shame," I replied. Then I suggested, "Next, let's visit the petrified forest." I spent the whole day showing my in-laws around the attractions of Mississippi. My mother-in-law really liked the city and even started talking about living there. She said, "I've fallen in love with Mississippi." "Thank you, Molly. Would it be okay if I stayed here for a while?" I said, "Of course. I'm usually not home during the day, so I'll give you a spare key." I handed her the key, thinking they'd stay for 4 or 5 days, but a week passed, and they showed no signs of leaving. Eventually, I made them an offer. "If you love it here so much, I could lease the apartment to you for $600 a month. I can stay at my parents' house in the meantime." To my surprise, my father-in-law got really angry. "What on earth are you thinking? Asking family to pay rent? You should let us stay for free." My mother-in-law quickly stepped in to calm him down, but the situation still made me feel uneasy. So, I suggested, "How about this? You just cover the cost of utilities, electricity, water, and gas." One day during their second week at my place, I got a phone call while I was at work. It was the property manager, Brian. He told me, "We got a call from the downstairs neighbors. They said there's a water leak coming from your apartment, and it's staining their ceiling. Can you come over right away? We can't go inside without your permission." I couldn't leave work immediately, but I managed to return to the apartment during my lunch break. When I walked in with the property manager, my mother-in-law looked surprised. "Oh, Molly, what brings you here? What about work?" I explained. The people downstairs said there might be a water leak from this apartment. She seemed clueless and replied, "A water leak? I don't know anything about that." Whether she truly didn't know or was pretending, I wasn't sure, so I walked past her to check near the washing machine. The washing machine was spinning, but the hose had come loose, causing a mess. This is the problem, I thought. I went downstairs with the property manager, and we were allowed to check the ceiling. Sure enough, there was a large stain spreading from where the washing machine was located. I sighed in frustration. My mother-in-law came to see the damage, looking guilty, and quickly went back upstairs. I had to apologize to the neighbors downstairs, bringing them a box of cookies, and I also got billed for the repair costs by the property management. When I told my mother-in-law, she lashed out, saying, "So, you're telling us to leave, huh? We're not going anywhere that easily. Should we just pack up and go?" The complaints didn't stop there. Soon after, the property manager called again with another issue. I braced myself. This time, the complaint was about my father-in-law singing loudly on the balcony at night, disturbing the neighbors. Frustrated, I went to the apartment, only to find my in-laws were gone. They left a note saying, "Thanks for your hospitality, we're heading back to Seattle." I couldn't believe it. They had left without paying for any of the utilities they used, and they left behind a ton of garbage. "At least take out your trash," I muttered to myself. With them gone, I moved back into my apartment from my parents' house. One day, my husband called unexpectedly. He said, "My parents love your apartment, so I'm giving it to them as a gift. Understand? If you don't agree, we're getting a divorce." In the background, I could hear my mother-in-law laughing. After leaving my apartment, my in-laws had moved into their son's government housing. Instead of talking to me directly, they had manipulated my husband into demanding that I give up my apartment. Now, I was forced to make a choice. I either give up the apartment I worked so hard for or get a divorce. I thought long and hard, feeling torn. Finally, I made up my mind. 2 days later, my husband called, but instead of texting me through WhatsApp, he said angrily, "You'll pay for this." That same day, when he gave me the ultimatum to choose between the apartment or a divorce, I sent him the divorce papers by express mail. He was furious, as he didn't expect me to act so decisively. Not even a week later, my boss called me into the office. To my shock, I received a transfer order to Dallas. It turned out that my ex-husband, who handled personnel, had pulled some strings to harass me because I refused to give up my apartment. I won't forget this, I thought. But what about my apartment? Should I give in and rent it to my ex's parents? I wasn't sure what to do, so I went to see the legal affairs officer at my workplace. The officer told me, "You have no connection to your ex-husband anymore, so you're not related to his parents either. I think you should rent it out as a landlord." That's exactly what I was thinking. I immediately called my in-laws, who had returned to Portland, and told them that I was ready to rent my apartment out. When I was transferred to Dallas, my in-laws surprisingly agreed to rent the apartment without any hassle. It turned out it wasn't harassment, they just really liked the place. I set a rent of $700 a month, including utility bills and the cost of the repairs from before, and they accepted it without any fuss. While working in Dallas, I was also studying for a highly competitive internal selection exam. Only a few senior military officers get to the top level, and the biggest challenge was passing the exam to enter the command staff course. This course trains future unit commanders, and those who complete it are assigned to lead units all over the country. It wasn't so much about wanting power or control. I was driven by the desire to outrank my ex-husband and prove myself. To my delight, I passed the tough exam on the first try and was admitted to the command staff course. Watch this, Michael, I thought. The real revenge starts now. The course was held at the military officer school in New York, where my ex-husband lived. Even though he handled personnel matters, and probably knew I had passed, I didn't reach out to him, and he didn't contact me either. 16 months later, I completed the course and became a unit commander in charge of training soldiers in Nebraska. Coincidentally, my ex-husband was also assigned to Nebraska, where he worked at the Regional Cooperation Headquarters, handling military and local community relations. Thanks to the internal exam, I now outranked him. One day, during a training session for newly arrived senior officers in Nebraska, my ex-husband saw me and came straight over. The first thing he said was, "Why are you wearing a rank insignia that's higher than mine?" His outburst caught everyone by surprise, including the higher-ups around us. I calmly brushed it off, feeling satisfied inside. I thought to myself, I'm no longer stuck with someone like you. It was a beautiful, sunny Sunday, the day of the annual Base Open Day. This event gave regular citizens a rare chance to interact with military personnel. The atmosphere was lively, with children and adults cheering as they admired the tanks on display. The combat training simulation, where soldiers descended from a helicopter in a dramatic, Spider-Man-like fashion, left everyone amazed. People were taking photos with soldiers in camouflage, and many were excited to grab commemorative merchandise. As a training coordinator, I was stationed at a booth where citizens could try out the forward-leaning rest position alongside active servicemen. That's when my ex-husband appeared, bringing some members of the Parents Association. Seeing him made all my pent-up feelings of revenge toward him and my former in-laws flare up. It felt like the perfect moment to act. This is my chance for revenge. Without thinking, I called out to him and his parents, inviting them over to the booth. Reluctantly, my ex-husband joined in. I handed him an iron helmet and lined him up with the other servicemen. "All right," I announced. "In the military, we give everyone a number instead of calling them by name. I'm going to start the numbering. The person on the right says 1, then the next person says 2, and so on." I placed my ex-husband in the number 1 spot, lining him up with a mix of servicemen and regular citizens. "Numbering, start," I called out. 1, he said slowly. "You're too slow. When I say start, you respond right away," I snapped. Watching my ex-husband stand at attention like a soldier made me want to laugh. This is hilarious. Next, we moved on to practice the forward-leaning rest position. The instructor, a serviceman, explained the procedure. After the participants practiced several times and got the hang of it, I took over. "Now we're going to simulate combat training," I announced. "Soldiers, be mindful of where you're pointing your muzzles. For those without guns, just pretend." I gave orders to the 9 participants. "Target the tree ahead, move forward, but stay low, using the tree as cover. Keep your guns pointed toward the enemy, and move in teams using a bounding overwatch technique." Then I gave the command, "Number 1, bounding overwatch, move forward." I decided to push my ex-husband to his limits with my orders. "What are you doing? Number 1, you're too slow, move forward," I yelled. My ex-husband, though reluctant, followed my commands. "Number 1, you're standing too tall, you're going to get shot. Do you want to die, Number 1? I kept pushing him as he crawled around the ground with his rifle, looking completely defeated. Under the hot sun, he barely managed to say, "Number 1. Your voice is too quiet, say it again," I ordered. Suddenly, laughter erupted from the crowd. The spectators, who didn't know we were ex-spouses, thought it was funny to see a female commander bossing around a male soldier. However, my ex-husband's parents watched with grim faces. In the military world, rank is everything. My ex-husband had always used his higher rank to try and dominate me, both at work and in our personal life. There's even a saying that there's a rank system among military wives. His parents, who had always looked down on me, loved the attention he got, even though it was more because of his rank than his character. Fueled by frustration, I took the selection exam and passed it on the first try, completely flipping the situation. It felt amazing to show my ex-husband and his parents who was really in charge, especially in front of them, as they had always thought their son was so important. The way I berated him had a huge impact on them. A few days later, my ex-in-laws called to say they were moving out of the apartment. This meant I could finally stop commuting from my parents' house and move back into my own place. Ironically, I still run into my ex-husband here and there. Seeing the grimace on his face each time has become a secret little pleasure of mine.
You're a leech. Get out of your parents' place now. I was rolling down the hallway in my wheelchair when suddenly my sister-in-law came up to me. She started her usual taunting, but I acted like I didn't hear her. Then she blocked my path, and before I knew it, I felt weightless, then a sharp pain as I crashed to the floor. Catherine had shoved me and my wheelchair down. My arm throbbed with pain as I lay there, and she just laughed and kicked my wheelchair away. "You deserve this. I won't give it back until you leave." Catherine always treated me like trash, like it was no big deal. I couldn't understand her cruelty. That's when I decided to leave that place I once called home. Now with the big house and all its riches to myself, Catherine smirked like some evil creature satisfied with herself. In that moment, I vowed to get revenge on my sister-in-law, who cared only for her own selfish desires. I'm Emily, 33 years old. 3 years ago, on a rainy day at the station, I slipped on a step, fell, and ended up with paraplegia. Now I rely on my wheelchair for everything. When I first realized I couldn't move my legs, I cried out of frustration. But with time, I've come to terms with my new reality and adapted as best as I can. I even work from home now. Originally, I lived with my parents, but 2 years ago, we remodeled the house to make it more wheelchair-friendly. Because I'm conscious of being seen, I tend to spend most of my time indoors. My brother and his wife, Catherine, who got married a year ago, also live with us in our family home. Catherine is 3 years older than me. At first, I was thrilled, feeling like I had gained a real sister. But that was a big mistake. On the day Catherine moved in, after unpacking, she smiled at me and asked if we could have a heart-to-heart talk in my room to improve our relationship. I eagerly agreed, expecting a pleasant chat. As Catherine pushed my wheelchair into my room and closed the door with a bang, her expression changed completely. Gone was the gentle demeanor. Now she frowned as if she were a different person. Then she said something shocking. "You know, you're an eyesore. It's not just your legs, even your ears are bad. You in that wheelchair are an eyesore." Stunned by Catherine's sudden hostility, I could only respond vaguely, trying to laugh it off. "That's a joke, right?" I asked, but Catherine didn't back down. "First of all, I hate jokes. It's all true, obviously. But didn't you just say you wanted to get along? That was just an excuse to be alone with you." Her unexpected words threw me into a panic, and my hands started to shake as I covered my mouth. Wait a minute, I can't grasp the situation. Does she hate me? I thought, taking a deep breath and trying to comprehend what had just been said. But Catherine didn't stop there. She continued to berate me. "You're a parasite, living off others without working, just loafing around the house," she spat out. Feeling a mix of disbelief and hurt, I mustered the courage to look Catherine in the eye and respond. "I do work and contribute to the household expenses," I defended myself. But Catherine wouldn't believe me. "Don't lie. How can you work if you're always at home, idiot?" she countered. Trying to make sense of the situation, I was left bewildered. Being berated like this by my brother's wife, whom I'd only met a few times since their marriage, was a huge shock. Unsure of what to do next, I wondered if I should tell my brother about what had happened. But just as I was about to leave my room, memories flooded back to me. The moment I woke up in the hospital after my accident, realizing I couldn't move my legs. Back then, I couldn't accept this new reality about myself. Despite claiming to look forward to the future, I hardly leave the house due to my self-consciousness about others' stares. Maybe Catherine is going through something similar, I thought. Instead of causing more trouble by talking to my brother and parents, I decided to wait and see. Surely, if we lived together, we would eventually understand each other. With that in mind, I calmed my trembling heart. I made efforts to initiate conversations with Catherine, hoping to build a friendly relationship. However, her cold attitude only grew worse with each passing day. When our parents and brother were around, she acted like a caring sister. But as soon as they left for work, she started harassing me. One day she quoted, "He who does not work, neither shall he eat," before throwing away my lunch as soon as I sat down to eat. Despite my attempts to explain that I do work and contribute to the household expenses, Catherine wouldn't listen. She not only verbally abused me, but also deliberately obstructed my door with objects to trap me in my room. Unable to endure it any longer, I decided to tell my parents and brother about the situation in Catherine's presence, so she couldn't deny it. I explained how Catherine had been throwing away my food and trapping me in my room, causing me trouble. However, Catherine quickly denied everything, claiming that she threw away the food because she didn't like it, and accidentally left the vacuum cleaner in front of my room while cleaning. She apologized for her actions, admitting to being an imperfect wife and causing me discomfort. Catherine's tearful apology, which seemed like something out of a movie, completely fooled my parents and brother. Realizing I couldn't win this battle, I started to think it might be best to just avoid dealing with her altogether. From then on, I mostly stayed in my room, hardly speaking to anyone. A year later, as I was heading back to my room after breakfast, I ran into Catherine in the hallway, and she immediately started berating me again. Still planning to squat at your parents' house? I'm sick of persistent pests like you. Useless parasites should leave right now. Though being verbally abused had become routine, I pretended not to hear her. But when she blocked my way and refused to move, I tried to push past her. That's when she sneered and forcefully kicked my wheelchair. I was jolted by the impact and tumbled to the ground, feeling a sharp pain shoot through my arm. Struggling to get up, I found myself unable to lift the fallen wheelchair. As I lay there in pain and humiliation, Catherine stood over me, arms crossed, trying to contain her laughter. Pathetic, she scoffed. What a sight. Begging for help, I pleaded for her to return my wheelchair. But she only kicked it further away, out of my reach, saying she wouldn't give it back until I agreed to leave the house. Seeing her look down on me while committing such cruel acts made me realize I had to leave the home I once knew. With newfound determination, I decided to move to a high-rise apartment. But Catherine scoffed at the idea, mocking my ability to afford it. Despite her disbelief, I insisted on leaving the house and asked for my wheelchair back. The helper will be here soon, so ask them for help. Finally, I can get rid of this money eater. Now this big house and all its wealth are all mine. Get out your precious wheelchair and start packing right away. For the first time, I realized this was Catherine's true nature, to go to such lengths for her own desires. She truly was a terrifying person, becoming the devil in my eyes. She left without returning my wheelchair, leaving me exposed and shivering on the cold floor of the hallway during the winter season. My body temperature quickly drained, and despite my efforts to crawl towards my wheelchair, my injured arm was too weak to move me even a step. I hoped the helper would arrive soon. What if I had to stay like this forever? As I continued to shiver from the cold, I heard the front door open, and the helper arrived. I cried out for help, and the helper rushed over, noticing something was wrong. They immediately took me to the hospital, where fortunately, it was determined to be just a bruise with no bone abnormalities. I was prescribed ointment and returned home with a bitter feeling, beginning to prepare to move out. I wouldn't let this go. I would reveal Catherine's true nature and make her regret it. On the day of the move, Catherine was getting ready to leave after finishing her breakfast. She hurriedly headed to the front door, making sure to tell me one last thing. Make sure you clean up and leave before I get back, and never come back to this house again. I replied firmly, you don't have to worry. I'll be gone from here for good. Then, with a bitter finality, I said, goodbye forever. Goodbye. Catherine seemed unusually cheerful, and I couldn't help but wonder what her reaction would be when she found out about the impending tragedy that awaited her. My plan was nearing completion, but despite this, leaving the home I had grown attached to felt like being forcefully pulled away. I bid my farewells by touching the pillars and walls one last time, expressing my gratitude. Goodbye, my beloved home. Thank you for everything. As the moving truck drove away, I watched the house disappear from view, feeling a sense of longing. True to my word to Catherine, I moved to the top floor of a high-rise apartment. Looking out at the view outside, I felt a sense of excitement about my new life. However, my moment of excitement was interrupted by a phone call. Glancing at the screen, I saw Catherine's name displayed. Calmly, I answered the call. Hey, what's going on? Catherine's voice sounded frantic. There's nothing left in the house. What's going on? I replied coolly, it's because I've moved out. I'm busy, so I'm going to hang up now. But Catherine wasn't having it. Wait a minute. Who gave you permission to do such a thing? There's no TV, no air conditioner, not even a dresser. What have you done? Everything in the house was bought by me, so I don't need permission, do I? Nonsense. Return them at once. Catherine's voice rang with indignation. I remained firm. I won't be returning any of my belongings. By the way, the house is being converted to barrier-free, and the utility bills have all been paid by me. You know, I should actually be asking you for money. Catherine couldn't believe it. You can't be serious. You don't like jokes, so I'm being honest here. And yes, I've moved to a high-rise apartment, just as I declared. It's the top floor, so the view is amazing. Since she called, I took the opportunity to tell her the truth that Catherine never bothered to listen to before. Did you know that the person you've been ridiculing all this time was the one providing you with food and a place to live? How do you feel now? Catherine scoffed. That can't be. I've never been fed by you. How could someone who was holed up in the house earn any money? I revealed. I'm a stock trader making a killing. I used to work as a stockbroker before I became wheelchair-bound, so managing stocks is easy for me. Thanks to that, I now have savings of $3 million. Catherine's true feelings slipped out. Wait, don't tell me it's not your parents who are rich but you? I confirmed, that's right. My parents and brother earn an average income, so I've saved up all my earnings for their retirement. I thought you were wealthy because of the big house and renovations. Catherine's shock was evident. Ah, I was completely fooled. It seems you've misunderstood on your own. I continued, by the way, I also manage assets, and aside from the apartment I moved into today, I own several other properties. The real winner here is me. Catherine's tone turned hostile. You? I won't forgive you. But I remained unfazed. Make all the noise you want. You should be more worried about yourself, though. I've put the house up for sale. We've already moved out with my parents and brother, so you're the only one left behind. Catherine's panic was palpable. That's too much. My parents and brother have moved out with me. I chuckled inwardly. Oh, right. I forgot to mention, my brother has already blocked your phone and emails. Catherine's desperation was evident as she tried to contact my brother, only to be met with failure. All this was possible because you knocked me over in my wheelchair and injured me. Thank you for that. I concluded. The helpers saw what happened and told my parents, which is why my family cooperated with me. In fact, we have been secretly planning to leave the house without Catherine noticing. Moreover, my brother had prepared something else to ensure Catherine would be caught off guard. Didn't my brother suggest last night, why don't you go out tomorrow? It's going to be tough with the move. That was to empty the house without you noticing. Catherine was silent for a moment, likely at a loss for words. Then she suddenly changed her tone, attempting to sound sweet. Emily, I guess I went a bit too far with my pranks. From now on, I'll cherish you, so let's get along. But I wasn't buying it. Lying like that will only make your nose grow like Pinocchio. Don't nitpick. I want to be like real sisters with you, Emily. I couldn't stand her deceit. I can't stand to listen to such nonsense. By the way, this whole conversation is on speakerphone, and both my parents and brother are listening. And none of them will forgive you. But my brother will divorce you. So please, live well on your own. Catherine realized she was getting nowhere with me and made a last-ditch effort. Honey, can you hear me? This divorce talk is just a joke, right? My brother didn't seem inclined to answer her question. He was listening and laughing at her distress. Shut up, was all Catherine got in response. Hey, let's talk this over properly, okay? Catherine pleaded. Okay. I'll find out where the high-rise is and come over right away. Please tell me where it is. Surprised by her belief that she could still be forgiven, we all burst into laughter. But considering Catherine's persistence, I sternly warned her in a firm voice, if you try to enter the high-rise without permission, I will sue you for trespassing. Catherine tried to brush off my warning. Oh, don't say such scary things. I'm very serious. But I wasn't backing down. Moreover, for knocking me over in my wheelchair and causing injury, as well as the emotional distress, I will file a civil lawsuit for compensation. I have the medical certificate, so you can't escape this. Pay $20,000 promptly, please. Catherine panicked. If I have to pay that, I'll be broke. You have $3 million. You don't need the money. But I stood firm. I'm demanding compensation to make you reflect on your actions. If you disagree, talk to my lawyer. So goodbye forever. Desperate not to lose her wealthy spouse, Catherine apologized. I apologize. I'll change my ways, so please forgive me. but I wasn't buying it. Forgive you. You must be joking. I cut her off decisively, in the end, just to be safe. I took precautions to ensure Catherine couldn't enter the high-rise apartment. I gave a photo of her to the manager and informed them that she was a person of concern. If she even steps inside, the security guards will immediately rush over. My brother no longer wanted to see Catherine's face, so I asked a lawyer I know to finalize the divorce. Since Catherine had squandered my brother's earnings, she only received $20 in the property division. She was living in the house we put up for sale without permission, but was discovered by the real estate company that bought it and was fined for trespassing. Now a criminal, Catherine has become unwelcome even at her own family's home and is wandering the streets without a place to go. As promised, I filed for $2,000 in compensation. I will make sure she pays it no matter what. Our family has moved to a spacious, newly built high-rise apartment and is enjoying our days leisurely. While the large detached house was nice, the unobstructed views from the expansive windows are a refreshing change for me, who always sits in a wheelchair. On clear days, a beautiful mountain range is visible, and at night, the illumination from the building sparkles, providing new delights.
When Walter and I traveled to visit my in-laws, my mother-in-law, who came to pick us up at the airport, declared, "You can't ride in the car, so you must walk home." She snorted and turned up her nose. It was a 3-hour journey one way, and though I'm confident in my physical strength, this treatment was too much. I almost cried, but someone reached out to help me. In the end, it was my mother-in-law who regretted it. My name is Jennifer, and I'm 30 years old, happily married to Walter, whom I met 2 years ago in a college mountain club. Walter is handsome and popular, and when he asked me out, I wondered why he chose me. According to Walter, I move forward silently, even on the hardest routes, without complaining, and he likes that about me. Walter works for a well-known corporation and earns a high salary. We've been living happily together since our marriage, just like our student days. However, there is one thing that bothers me: Walter's frequent calls with his mother. During dinner, Walter hurried into his room with his mobile phone, apologizing. "Oh, it's a call from Mom. Sorry, I'll go talk to her." His mother calls him frequently, about once every 2 days. She seems to adore her son, and Walter is sweet to her, making me suspect he's a mama's boy. But since she raised Walter with care, I think I should value her too. However, it seems our feelings are different. It happened before our marriage when we went to greet my in-laws. Jennifer is 2 years older than my son, almost 30. My mother-in-law seemed displeased with having an older daughter-in-law and looked unhappy throughout. Father-in-law said, "It's fine, isn't it? Love conquers all." Jennifer seems reliable, and she's perfect for Walter, who has a weak side. But that seemed to displease her even more. Mother-in-law seems unable to oppose father-in-law directly, so she decided to bully me without him noticing. When she intentionally harassed me, she would open her eyes wide, snort, and twist her lips. I had become like a zoologist, able to distinguish her expressions. "Oh, it's okay, I can eat it." I smiled and cut off the spoiled part of the dried fruit and ate it. I had learned survival skills in the mountain club. Eat what you can of the food. Father-in-law and Walter laughed, but I didn't miss her brief, sharp look and click of her tongue. There were other instances like when she said, "Look, I went to Italy last week and bought souvenirs and pulled out a high-quality branded tie for Walter." For me, it was a flimsy t-shirt with a fake-looking logo, obviously a knockoff brand. "Come on, try on the tie, Jennifer. You try on the shirt too," she insisted. At that moment, her face showed that familiar expression, and I realized it was another harassment. "Oh no, I can't wear a tie with casual clothes. I'm not up for it right now either." I forced a smile to keep the atmosphere light, but inside I was fed up. Afterward, I only used that t-shirt for things like weeding in the summer or as a joke to show my friends in photos. I really hate even looking at it. These harassments were subtle enough that only I would recognize them as such, and when I told Walter, he would just say, "Mom's a bit quirky, so forgive her." However, the malice I felt little by little gradually wore me down. The town where we live is about an hour's drive from my in-laws, and the fact that we could easily visit them if we wanted to was also a source of gloom. Then one day, Walter dropped the sudden news. Jennifer, I'm sorry for the sudden news, but I've been transferred. It starts next month, so please prepare. Walter's sudden transfer was decided. Walter apologized, but secretly, I was relieved to have an excuse to distance ourselves from my in-laws. Plus, the new location was very close to my parents' home, so it felt like moving from away to home. But leave the preparations to me. I'll ask my family for help too, I said, happily proceeding with the preparations. Now I could finally get away from my mother-in-law's petty harassment. I was anxious about our new life, but 80% of my heart was occupied by the feeling of liberation from her. The move was completed, and I thought I could finally distance myself from her. But then, hello Jennifer, where have you been without answering the phone? You're not neglecting my son while hanging out at your parents' house again, are you? It was another call from her. I wanted to sigh heavily, but I held back and replied, I'm sorry I couldn't answer the phone earlier. I was in line at the checkout. Walter might be tired in this unfamiliar environment, so I want to support him with nutritious meals. Mother-in-law's calls started coming every 2 days. Although we saw each other less, we talked more. Most of the time, it was my mother-in-law unilaterally making snide remarks. My son is sensitive, but I wonder if someone with as thick skin as Jennifer can understand him. My son's high school girlfriend was a delicate and fragile girl, but his taste has changed quite a bit, hasn't it? Saying only things that would make me uncomfortable. Does mother-in-law have no other outlet for her stress? I felt like I had become a trash can labeled stress outlet. What hurt the most were the snide comments about children. Jennifer, you're already 30, aren't you? What do you think about children? I wonder if you, being older than my son, can have a normal child. I was shocked that someone would say such a thing in this day and age, but since it was something I had been concerned about recently, tears flowed after I hung up the phone. What does mother-in-law think of me? Does she think I won't be hurt by whatever she says? After that, the calls kept coming frequently, but when I responded only with safe answers to avoid making waves. Perhaps she found it boring and not worth bullying, so the number of calls gradually decreased. I was truly relieved from the bottom of my heart. Then on New Year's Day the following year, my husband and I headed to my in-laws' house. They were going to pick us up from the airport. Hey Walter, Jennifer, long time no see. Father-in-law waved and greeted us. I was honestly dreading seeing my mother-in-law, but father-in-law's friendliness was a relief. Happy New Year, Mom and Dad, Walter exclaimed. Happy New Year to you both. I chimed in. Happy New Year. I'm glad you came, father-in-law replied warmly, but mother-in-law didn't even look at me. Perhaps she was angry about my cold response to her frequent calls. It was an awkward relationship, and I was thinking about how to get through this situation. You must be tired from the journey. Shall we take a break at the airport cafe? Father-in-law cheerfully suggested, seemingly unaware of the tense atmosphere between mother-in-law and me. Oh, that's a good idea. Wasn't there a cafe on the second floor? Walter responded cheerfully, and we moved to a cafe inside the airport. Should I drive back? Mother-in-law asked. No, I'm still an active driver, Walter replied. While the men were chatting away, mother-in-law and I were silent. Excuse me, I'm going to the restroom, I said after ordering and got up from my seat. Oh, maybe I'll go too, mother-in-law said, standing up to follow me. I had a bad feeling about this. Just as the entrance to the women's restroom came into view, mother-in-law, walking behind me, said, You can't ride in the car, so why don't we walk back? Not understanding what she meant, I turned to look at mother-in-law, and there was that expression again. We're going back as a family of 3. You're a stranger, aren't you? I couldn't believe my ears. Walk back from here to my in-laws' house? How far could that be? And calling her son's wife a stranger. While I was frozen in shock, mother-in-law continued to throw words at me. I was kind enough to call you frequently, but unlike Walter, you only respond coldly. Living near your parents' house has gotten to your head. I don't want to think of you as my daughter-in-law. You're a stranger, a stranger. Mother-in-law's voice was getting louder. I was shocked, but I didn't want to argue in public, so I answered in a small voice, Yes, I understand. I didn't feel like going back to where Walter and father-in-law were, so I headed to the airport exit, plodding along. Even though she told me to walk back, this was an airport. There must be taxis and buses. I could go as far as I could and walk from there. But more than that, What face should I make when I safely arrive at my in-laws' house by walking? How should I spend a few days in my stay? That weighed more heavily on my mind. For now, I searched on my mobile phone for transportation to my in-laws' house. There was a bus leaving in just 10 minutes, but that bus wouldn't go near my in-laws' house. So from there, it seemed I would have to walk. It might take about 3 hours in total. 3 hours. I can walk that with my legs trained in mountain climbing. It's not impossible, but there's a difference between walking for mountain climbing and walking because I'm not allowed in the car due to harassment. Tears welled up in my eyes. Wasn't it my fault? If I had been pleasant on the phone, even after being told such things, would this have happened? As I was walking along, lost in thought, I was suddenly tapped on the shoulder from behind. "Jennifer, why are you walking here?" Father-in-law's voice broke through my thoughts. "Did my wife say something to you at the entrance to the restroom?" "I was going to the restroom too, and I saw you and my wife talking, and then you started to go somewhere, so I followed you." Looking at father-in-law's kind face, the tears that had been welling up in my eyes overflowed and ran down my cheeks. "Jennifer, what on earth happened?" Father-in-law's concern was evident, and I decided to tell him the truth. I told father-in-law exactly what mother-in-law had said, and he became angrier than I had ever seen him. "Oh dear, did she say that to my son's wife?" Then he said something I never expected. "I'll walk with you, Jennifer." With that, father-in-law stood in front of me and started walking. Father-in-law, don't worry, I enjoy mountain climbing, and I used to climb a lot with Walter when he was little. A 3-hour one-way walk is nothing. Indeed, father-in-law's stride was firm, not what you'd expect from a 62-year-old. "Come on, let's go." We didn't tell Walter we were leaving. Is that okay?" I finally remembered that, in my shock at mother-in-law's words, I had just left. "Walter will be fine. She'll probably talk him into waiting. I'll contact him." With that, father-in-law took out his mobile phone. It seems he was texting mother-in-law. He told her he was walking back with me and that the car keys were in his bag. As we waited for the bus, father-in-law's mobile phone rang. Father-in-law answered, his voice filled with restrained anger. It must have been mother-in-law on the other end. "I heard what you said to Jennifer. If you're going to say that, I won't ride in the car either." I could hear mother-in-law's panicked voice shouting from the other end. "That's not it. She said she wanted to walk for exercise." How brazen. I was more dumbfounded than angry. "We'll talk when we get home." Father-in-law hung up and shoved his mobile phone into his pocket. Perhaps because father-in-law's mobile phone was unreachable, mine started ringing next. It's definitely mother-in-law, father-in-law, and I looked at each other. What does she want now? To tell us to ride in the car? I'm definitely not answering. I decided to ignore it too. Father-in-law and I silently boarded the bus and continued to walk after getting off. This way is a shortcut. There's a slope here for a while. But let's do our best. Father-in-law occasionally gave advice, making it feel like we were mountain climbing together. However, I hadn't planned on walking so much today and was wearing regular boots. Father-in-law was wearing leather shoes. Won't walking for a long time in those shoes hurt your feet? I asked once. Father-in-law glanced at my feet and squinted. I guess we're in the same boat. Making a woman walk such a long distance in those shoes. I can't believe her, father-in-law sighed. We both thought of calling a taxi, but neither of us mentioned it, intending to spite mother-in-law. But Jennifer, you're strong. Walking such a long distance without complaining. Walter must have been attracted to that quality in you, father-in-law remarked, making me feel a little happy. Afterward, we continued to walk, buying drinks from vending machines in a grocery store to stay hydrated. About 3 hours later, as the sun began to set, we finally arrived at my in-laws' house. Their car was parked in front of the house. Mother-in-law and Walter must be home. "We're back," father-in-law announced as he opened the front door. Walter rushed over, concerned. "Jennifer, I was worried. What happened? Why did you suddenly decide to walk back for exercise?" "Did you hear that from Mom?" "That's not it. Mom told Jennifer to walk back," father-in-law explained, looking understandably tired as he sat down on a chair near the entrance. Mother-in-law, who had come out of the living room, was pale and gaping. "No, that's not it. It's not. It seems there was a misunderstanding," she stammered. "What was the misunderstanding?" I couldn't keep quiet any longer. "You said since I can't ride in the car, why don't I walk back? didn't you?" This was the plain truth. I hate lying. Thanks to that, I was reminded of my mountain climbing club days. A 3-hour one-way walk was good exercise. Walter looked back at mother-in-law. He knew well that I'm not the type to lie. The eyes of father-in-law, Walter, and I were all on mother-in-law. "What? You believe this woman over me? Throughout your family, this woman is a stranger, right? You believe a stranger over your family," mother-in-law screamed. "So I was not allowed in the car because I'm a stranger," I said quietly. "Mom, I can't believe you would say something like that. Jennifer is an important part of my family. I wanted you to feel the same way," Walter said, clenching his fist. His hand was trembling with anger. "If you're going to treat Jennifer like this, I'm done with you, Mom. I won't answer your calls anymore. Don't contact Jennifer either." Walter took my hand and said, "Let's go." "Walter, wait," mother-in-law pleaded, but Walter slammed the door and without looking back, took my hand and started walking. A year later, "Hey Jennifer, Walter over here. You can see the view really well," father-in-law called out as we were mountain climbing together. Walter received a transfer order 6 months later, and we moved back to our previous home. After the incident at the New Year celebration, father-in-law decided to divorce and moved alone near our house. Climbing together on weekends had become a regular thing. "Shall we have lunch here at the summit?" Walter suggested eagerly, and we began preparing our meal. While working, father-in-law started talking. Mom went on a spending spree after the divorce. Even though the property division was done properly, it seems she's already in financial trouble. She might have been lonely. The divorce was tough with all the crying and screaming, father-in-law explained. "Putting some distance between us now is probably best for both of us. She should expand her world too. Otherwise, she's the type to take out her stress on those close to her," he added. I listened silently to their conversation. "I'll cherish my own world so I don't have to take out my stress on others," I resolved, looking at the view from the mountain with my precious family. After dodging my 2 nieces who were trying to push me into the pool but ended up falling in themselves, chaos ensued. Most of the other guests found it hilarious, but their moms, who were pretty drunk, freaked out. Since I wasn't dressed for swimming, I stepped away from the pool and let others rescue the kids. My intoxicated sisters and their husbands started yelling at everyone, including me, for spoiling their fun. They were also upset because the kids had dropped their parents' phones into the pool while filming the failed prank. One of my brothers-in-law tried to retrieve the phones from the pool, but his size made it impossible. No one else volunteered to help, probably because my sisters were still yelling and cursing. I reminded my sisters that it was their responsibility to watch their kids, and if anything happened, it was on them, not me. There were heated arguments, and my wife and I decided to leave, especially after another brother-in-law stumbled and fell face first onto the concrete. After we left, the party ended on a sour note. My drunk brother-in-law, who had fallen and injured his face while yelling at me, had to go to urgent care to get stitches. Since he was too intoxicated to drive, my dad had to take him, and he was not happy about it. Later that evening, my sister started a group text and said some really nasty things about my wife and me, calling me the Ardu, real winner, and their husbands added some hurtful comments too. My wife and I decided to block the 4 of them. My mom called me, upset about what was said, and my parents insisted that my sisters and brothers-in-law come over the next day, without their kids, to sort things out and establish some ground rules. The result was a half-hearted apology from the nieces. Thinking things were settled, I unblocked them that evening. However, I received a text from one of the brother-in-laws demanding payment for the $750 phones. I replied saying I wouldn't be paying and forwarded his message to my parents, stating that we were done with the nonsense and going no contact with my sisters and their spouses, refusing any future invitations if they would be present. I then blocked them again. This triggered a major confrontation. Dad called them and gave them a piece of his mind. Among other things, he told them that the grandkids were not welcome at their place indefinitely, since my mom often provided free babysitting, which shook them up. He also banned them from using the vacation house, a big deal since they frequently stayed there. My dad dropped a bombshell on my sisters and brothers-in-law. My wife and I actually owned the vacation house, not my parents. This news shocked them because both their families frequently used the place, even inviting friends for weekend getaways. It was unlike my parents to assert ownership like this, indicating they had reached their limit. For context, I never wanted my sisters to know about our ownership of the house. We bought it for my parents, who had always dreamed of having a mountain retreat. Keeping our ownership quiet was a way to avoid drama with my siblings. A couple of days later, my sisters and their husbands showed up unannounced at our place to apologize in person. However, we were out to dinner, so they left a note. One sister also called me at work, but I sent her to voicemail, as I was prepared to cut off contact with them. However, things took a turn for the worse. I recently discovered that my oldest sister and her husband, who have 3 kids, have been living beyond their means and are in financial trouble. To grasp the significance of this, you need to understand that my sisters believe our parents are wealthy and expect to inherit everything when they pass away. As a result, they haven't been concerned about money. It turns out my parents aren't wealthy at all, which puts my oldest sister in serious financial trouble. Her family has maxed out credit cards and is behind on car leases, with one vehicle on the verge of repossession. Despite bragging about a high income, she actually earns much less than claimed. She confessed all this to Mom on Tuesday because they need a loan. To make matters worse, for the past 3 years, instead of using the vacation house regularly as intended, my oldest sister has been secretly renting it out for extra cash. She's been making significant amounts, charging over $2,000 for weekends and at least $4,000 for a week. With her cut off from using the house, she's already had to cancel bookings, fearing they'll lose everything. My parents can't afford to lend them money, and my other sister, who was aware of the rental scheme, likely did the same thing. I once encountered strangers claiming to stay at the house with my sister's family, assuming they were friends. Now I realize she might have been renting it out too. My parents are stressed, especially Mom, who feels deeply betrayed. Dad is mostly angry about the situation. He's hurt and embarrassed that he can't help his daughter. He's made it clear that the sisters won't be using the vacation home anytime soon, as far as he's concerned. My parents filled me in on what was happening because they anticipated my sisters would approach me next. And they were right. On Thursday, my sisters showed up at our place again, this time without their husbands, and waited outside until I got home. I faced a tough choice. Either argue with them in public, risk a scene if I entered without them, or let them in. Reluctantly, I decided to let them in. I listened to their bogus story, with the older sister and the younger one backing her up, about why they urgently needed to use the mountain house again. They also claimed I was a lousy brother and should plan on paying for their kids' college tuition, because that's supposedly what family does. I let them finish their pitch, then called them out based on what my parents had told me. Things quickly spiraled downhill from there, with denial, tears, curses, and shouting. My ears were ringing for days afterward. After about an hour, they finally left. I took a shower and laid down, only to find out from my wife that she had to block more phone numbers because my sisters were bombarding us with calls from new ones. The very next day, my parents informed me they were washing their hands of managing the vacation home. Essentially, they passed the responsibility onto me and said it was my problem from now on. Fed up with everything, I drove up to the vacation house and padlocked the entrance gate shut with a heavy-duty chain and lock. I'm the only one with a key, and I thought this would be enough to keep my siblings away, as they'd struggle to hike the 400 yards uphill to the house. I also took several additional security measures to safeguard the property. I reset all the door keypads, installed security cameras overlooking the valley, and added a heavy-duty lockout for the water shutoff and drain valve. I only confided in my wife about locking off the water supply, and we're the only ones with the keys. It's a good thing I took those security measures because a few days later, both of my sisters' husbands called me separately at my office, trying to convince me to let them use the vacation house as they always had. The older one had gone up with friends for a hangout, but couldn't get in due to the gate lock. He was pretty upset and embarrassed about being locked out. During his call, he alternated between being pushy and playing the victim. At one point, he even threatened to tear the gate out of the ground. He also admitted they had been renting out the house to friends and claimed they needed the money. He accused me of ruining their business and demanded I refund their guests' money. The other brother-in-law seemed more like he was being forced to call by my sister. He didn't put up much of a fight when I told him they couldn't use the house anymore. I made it clear to both of them that they were not welcome to use the property again and not to ask again. To ensure they wouldn't try anything sneaky with the house, I hired someone to manage and oversee it. He has access to the camera feeds and conducts regular checks on the property. Additionally, he installed the camera near the entrance of the private road leading to the house, which takes still shots whenever a vehicle passes by. He sends these photos to everyone once or twice a week. As for my sisters and brothers-in-law, it seems like things were tense and strained at this time. My parents informed me that my oldest sister and her husband are making significant changes due to their financial situation. They're getting out of their SUV and big truck leases and selling off their jet skis and other unnecessary possessions. This adjustment will be tough for my sister, who often brags and values material possessions. Similarly, my brother-in-law's identity is closely tied to his truck, to the point where he even has a tattoo of the truck company's logo. This difference in priorities has always kept us from being close. Then things took a drastic turn when my two brothers-in-law made a decision that had severe consequences for them and my sisters. They broke into my vacation home and were subsequently arrested. They faced charges of breaking and entering, destruction of property, and communicating threats, all serious offenses. I refused to drop the charges against them, and they remained in jail as of the following day. I learned the full story afterward. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, my brothers-in-law went to my vacation home. Using an angle grinder, they cut through the chain on the driveway gate, damaging it in the process. They attempted to enter through the front door, damaging the lock and door in the process. Eventually, they gained access through the utility floor door and a locked internal door. They also broke into the barn for reasons unknown. When they attempted to leave through the front door, they were confronted by sheriff's deputies and David, the individual I hired to oversee the property. David received notifications from the camera system and alerted the sheriff's department. Despite the brothers-in-law's attempts to explain themselves, the deputies didn't buy it. Breaking into an empty house is a serious offense in that area, typically associated with criminal activity. Upon their arrest, my brothers-in-law reacted poorly, making threats against me in front of law enforcement. David and the sheriff's office attempted to contact my wife and me to determine our course of action, but we were spending time with her parents and had left our phones in a car to disconnect. Consequently, the authorities proceeded with booking the brothers-in-law on all charges, which aligned with my wishes. After their arrest, my brothers-in-law called their wives from jail, causing them to panic. They reached out to my parents and attempted to contact me, but their calls were blocked. They tried to find a lawyer to arrange bail, but it was challenging due to the rural area and the holiday weekend. My oldest sister had no cash, and her cards were maxed out, so if they made bail, my other sister would have had to foot the bill for both husbands. By the end of Friday, I contacted the sheriff's department to confirm that I wanted to press charges. On Saturday afternoon, I spoke with my parents, who were visibly shaken by the situation, especially my mom. My sisters had pressured them to convince me to drop the charges, but I firmly refused, stating that I wouldn't consider it until I spoke with an attorney and was compensated for the damages. Feeling awful about upsetting my mom, my dad suggested starting over completely, but also insisted that my sisters and brothers-in-law should pay for the damage. I reached out to 2 attorney friends to recommend a lawyer to pursue legal action against my family members. The following week, I received a courier-delivered envelope at my office containing a signed letter from both brothers-in-law and a cashier's check for $5,000. In the letter, they sincerely apologized, admitted their wrongdoing, and offered to cover the damages, promising more if necessary. They also agreed to stay away from the vacation home unless specifically invited and requested that I work towards getting the charges dropped, as their jobs were at risk. They were open to a restraining order or any other measures necessary for resolution. This sudden change in behavior was shocking and unexpected. I had already scheduled a meeting with an attorney to pursue legal action, but I informed him of the letter and check, and he agreed to discuss it further at the end of the day. Instead of waiting until next week, my attorney advised me not to deposit the check from my brothers-in-law and met with me for about 2 hours. He recommended that my wife and I pursue a settlement and mutual release agreement with all 4 of them. He explained that although we would likely win a lawsuit against them, it could take years, involve significant upfront legal fees, and there was no guarantee we would recover any money. He also assured us that we could keep the $5,000 they offered, regardless of whether we pursued legal action. The agreement will include terms similar to a civil restraining order. I had already requested my property manager to estimate the cost of repairs. and I received the estimate promptly. It's expected to cost around $4,000, with most of the expense going towards repairing the front door. On Friday, my attorney contacted each of the brothers-in-law, advised them to seek legal representation, and they agreed. The middle brother-in-law explained they could only afford to pay for damages or a lawyer, not both. They believed hiring a lawyer wouldn't make a difference, given they had no defense for their actions. Their main concern was getting the charges dropped. My attorney also reached out to the district attorney's office to discuss dismissing the charges, but hasn't spoken to them yet. He believes they will likely dismiss the charges because the brothers-in-law are willing to pay for damages and have no prior criminal record. However, he advised me to be prepared to personally request dismissal if necessary. He also recommended maintaining no contact with my sisters and brothers-in-law, especially for the next 6 months, and emphasized the importance of adhering to the terms of the agreement in future interactions with them. It seems my brothers-in-law's change of heart stems from realizing the potential consequences, including legal fees, fines, and even the possibility of jail time, as well as the risk to one brother-in-law's security clearance. This settlement is their last-ditch effort to salvage their normal lives. On a personal note, receiving a written apology from them was unexpectedly significant for me. It marked a moment of closure I hadn't anticipated. It seems that the written apology from my brothers-in-law holds significant meaning for me, more so than the monetary compensation. Nonetheless, I'm grateful for the money, even though I suspect it came from my middle sister and her husband, as the cashier's check is from his company's credit union. Last week, I met with my attorney to finalize the agreement. We made a few minor adjustments, and he sent it to my sisters and brothers-in-law, including a provision that they cover my legal fees, which amounted to about $3,000. They weren't thrilled about it and attempted to negotiate, but my attorney stood firm, stating it was non-negotiable. He made it clear that if they didn't agree, we proceed with legal action against them. Additionally, he informed them that I would push hard with the DA's office to prosecute every charge. In the end, they agreed to the terms and signed the agreement, albeit in a tense atmosphere. The middle brother-in-law seemed to take charge and even threatened to walk away from the deal if my sisters didn't cooperate. They provided another cashier's check for $2,500, claiming it was all they could afford. Although it wasn't a full amount, we accepted it as final payment. According to my attorney, the signing was cold and curt, but they managed to keep it together long enough to finalize the agreement and leave without causing a scene. Yesterday, I visited the vacation house to assess the damage, which only fueled my anger further. The vandalism felt utterly senseless, and in the heat of the moment, I was ready to cover the repair costs and seek vengeance. However, after lunch, I visited the DA's office. Despite the initial wait, I met with the assistant DA, who informed me that since I didn't want to prosecute and the brothers-in-law had paid for damages, they were willing to drop all charges except for trespassing, which would be considered a Class 2 misdemeanor. The brothers-in-law would plead guilty and face whatever fine the judge deems appropriate. It's clear that any resistance from my brothers-in-law during their arrest would have significantly impacted the outcome. I've been advised that any further trouble from them, even a minor offense, could result in serious consequences. I made sure to express my gratitude to the sheriff's office for their prompt response, although I couldn't personally thank the deputies. I also attempted to reach David, the property manager, to express my appreciation, but was unsuccessful. Regarding the agreement, it includes a no-contact clause, stipulating that neither party can approach the other without prior agreement or legal representation present. They are allowed to keep the proceeds from renting the vacation house, though any tax implications will be their responsibility. Additionally, we release each other from any further liabilities up to the present moment. These are the main points of the agreement, and my wife and I will sign it later today. While I won't be able to discuss the details further, I can provide some general information about the situation.
My dad yelled at me, saying I wasn't welcome in our house anymore. John, my future husband, backed me up. I left home crying right after finishing high school. My name's Amy, now 36 and a farmer. It's been 18 years since I left home. It's hitting me that I've spent more time away than there. I grew up in the city, with my dad working in an office and mom staying home. It was me, my older brother, and our parents. My parents favored my brother, who was older. He always got better stuff and attention. He'd brag about it, believing he was better. I'd often felt lonely and wished for some attention, but my parents never changed. I gave up trying. The turning point came in high school when my brother struggled with his exams. He'd take out his frustration on me all the time. My parents treated my brother delicately, while giving me all the household chores, leaving me no time to study. They even tried to lower my grades to make my brother feel better, even though I was doing better in school. It didn't make any sense. Then I heard about a rural program from a teacher at school. It was a 2-night, 3-day trip where students could experience farm life. Despite my parents' objections, saying farming was only for fools who couldn't get corporate jobs, I bravely signed up, using my own saved pocket money. It was the first time I stood up to my parents, and it turned out to be the right decision. Working on the farm was refreshing, and I felt the warmth of a family there. John, the eldest son of the family hosting us, was kind and different from my brother. His parents were gentle too. After the program ended, I promised to come back. They didn't use phones much, so I wrote them letters regularly, feeling a connection I never had at home. Soon, John and I began exchanging letters regularly, almost like a diary. Our connection grew, and we started dating, despite never even sharing a kiss. It was a pure long-distance relationship. Meanwhile, my brother's failure to get into his preferred university landed him in a lesser college. I, on the other hand, aimed for college, but my parents pressured me to work instead, claiming women didn't need education. But I suspected they just didn't want me to surpass my brother. Since the rural program, I dreamt of being a farmer. While I could have pursued farming without college, John was in the city, pursuing his studies. So I decided to attend college, aiming for a different kind of farming. With a clear goal in mind, I dedicated myself to studying every day. Despite my parents' and brother's interference, I passed the university entrance exam. But my father was furious, asking if I, a woman, planned to outdo my brother. My mother echoed, saying they couldn't afford my education, as my brother needed the money. Their words left me devastated, and after a big fight, I cut ties with them. John, now my husband-to-be, and his parents supported my college expenses, and I attended college. 4 years later, I married John without ever contacting my parents or brother during college. However, when my in-laws insisted we inform my family about the marriage, we visited my childhood home for the first time in 4 years. It was a busy time, with planting season in full swing, so we couldn't visit until early summer. All of us, including my in-laws, husband, and myself, had tanned faces from working outdoors. My parents and brother openly mocked us. My mother, with a hint of condescension, asked how old we were, assuming we must be poor to have such dark tans from working. I felt mortified and begged her to stop, but she ignored me. My brother added insult to injury, boasting about making money through intellectual work and implying that farming was beneath us. I felt my face drain of color as my in-laws' smiles faltered. But my husband stood his ground, proudly declaring our profession as farmers. In response, my father laughed mockingly, declaring me a stranger from that moment on. He made it clear that marrying a farmer meant I was no longer welcome in their lives. They warned me not to come asking for money and stated they wanted nothing to do with me anymore. Having been disowned at 18, I knew I was on my own, even without being explicitly told again. Yet I still tried to maintain some courtesy, though the sympathetic looks from my in-laws and John were hard to bear. Quietly weeping on the way home, I resolved to forget about my biological family. Time passed quickly, and 18 years flew by. The emotional wounds healed, and I became a mother of 2, leading busy but fulfilling days. Though I had virtually erased memories of my parents and brother, a cousin informed me of my brother's upcoming wedding. Despite our estrangement, my cousin and I stayed close, occasionally chatting on the phone and maintaining a relationship. They mentioned we could meet at the wedding, but I hadn't heard anything about it from my parents or brother. Since we were estranged, I had no way of knowing. I learned they were building a new duplex and wondered if it was completed. Apparently, both my parents and my brother and his wife planned to move in. After the wedding, my cousin, aware of the estrangement between my parents and me, assumed I'd still attend family events like weddings and funerals. Feeling impulsive, I decided to call my mother's cell phone, only to hear an automated message saying the number was no longer in use. The same went for my father's number. Unable to reach my brother because I didn't have his number, I nervously dialed the landline for our family home. To my surprise, it connected. "Hello?" It was my brother who answered. "Brother, it's Amy. I heard you're getting married and moving." I trailed off, about to offer my congratulations when he interrupted me. "There's no need for you to do anything. You're just a farmer, a stranger to me. Don't call me." With that, he yelled and hung up the phone. I rushed to call him back, only to discover I was already blocked. It was a harsh reality. No matter how much he despised me, we were still family. It hurt deeply to be rejected like this. Seeing my distress, my husband grew concerned and gently asked what was wrong. Unable to hold back my tears any longer, I recounted the conversation to him. Both my husband and in-laws were furious, reacting as if the rejection had happened to them. "Your home is here, Amy. Your family is us," reassured my mother-in-law, her words bringing tears to my eyes. I wished she were my real mom. She cared for me more than my biological mother ever did. My father-in-law added his comforting words, saying, "You're happy now, and that's all that matters. No need to get hurt. The one who laughs is the winner." My husband chimed in, suggesting we take them as a bad example and ensure we don't turn out like that. Even our children, unaware of the situation, hugged me tightly. "Thank you, everyone," I said, feeling a warmth in my heart. I realized how happy I was now, even without the support of a loving biological family. However, things took a drastic turn when my business was featured on national television. My in-laws were originally large-scale grain farmers in the American Midwest, also growing a wide variety of fruits and vegetables. But much of their produce didn't meet the standards. Studying food business in college, I devoted time to figuring out how to sell all the produce without waste. I launched an online business selling jams, juices, and pickles made from slightly damaged fruits and vegetables that couldn't be sold otherwise. With the backing of the local farmers union, my business became a huge success. It appealed to moms wanting safe, domestically produced food for their children, as well as seniors yearning for nostalgic homemade pickles. I built the company with other young women who, like me, had married into farming families, along with unemployed young people. In time, it grew into a $5 million business, and our success story caught the attention of the media, leading to an in-depth report. After the TV broadcast, we were inundated with calls, including business transactions and interview requests. When an unknown number called, I answered without much thought, only to find it was my brother. I guessed he must have seen the national television coverage of my success. Barely exchanging greetings, he abruptly asked for money, saying he wanted to start a business. My immediate response was a firm no, and I hung up, feeling a stronger version of my initial rejection. Yet he persisted, insisting that if I, a simple farmer, could succeed, then he was bound to as well. His attitude baffled me, especially since he had previously treated me as a stranger. I didn't engage with his demands and instead questioned why I wasn't informed about the family's move. Turns out it was his wife, whom I never met, who made the decision. She suggested cutting ties the moment my name was mentioned. Realizing the similarity in character between my brother's wife and my parents, I decided to end the conversation and block his number. It struck me that if my brother saw me on TV, it likely meant my parents had too. A few hours later, another call came in from an unknown number, which turned out to be my father. He demanded to know why I was the boss, insinuating I had stolen a man's job. I explained that both John and my father-in-law were involved in the farming business, so it made sense. Large-scale consolidation had become advantageous, and my father-in-law was the president of the local agricultural association, while John was the president of our corporation. Perhaps my explanation convinced him. as he then asked why I hadn't contacted them. I was dumbfounded by his question, reminding him that they had disowned me. I promptly hung up and blocked his number. Shortly after, my mother called, demanding money, claiming I made $500 million a year and accusing me of forgetting all the favors they'd done for me. I clarified that the business revenue was after expenses and salaries, that she didn't believe me, insisting I was lying. Irritated, I refused to send money, stating that we were strangers now, and blocked her number too. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was mistaken. My parents, brother, and his wife, whom I had never met, showed up uninvited at my in-laws' house. My father announced that he was revoking the disownement, shocking me with their desperation for money. Even my in-laws expressed discomfort, glaring at my parents in silence, and the employees around us looked stunned. Despite their intrusion, my brother insisted that as the real family, they had a right to my earnings. His wife nodded in agreement. I was furious. I rejected their claim, pointing out that despite our blood connection, there was no emotional bond. They had treated me like a stranger and abandoned me. The emotional wounds from being abandoned by my biological family resurfaced, and I was on the brink of tears once more. But in that moment, John stood beside me, defending me fiercely. He declared that I was now part of their family and that they were perfectly happy without my parents disowning me. The employees echoed his sentiments, criticizing my parents in unison. Feeling a sense of belonging, I was profoundly happy. However, my brother became angry, insulting the employees as low-educated trash and demanding their obedience. But John calmly revealed our educational backgrounds, surprising my brother. Despite graduating from top universities, my brother couldn't comprehend why we chose farming. But John asserted that farming is a respectable profession where we can apply our college education effectively. I couldn't help but laugh at the scene, feeling relieved that my brother had lost to John in every aspect. I made it clear once more that we were already strangers, unable to lend or give money to them. With a polite tone, I asked them to leave, warning of legal action if they caused trouble. My in-laws and husband stood by me, protecting me from harm. Deeply moved by their support, I felt truly cherished. The employees joined in, urging my family to leave. Despite their resentful glares, they had no choice but to retreat. Later, I learned from my cousin that my family had attempted to get rich quick with a business venture, which led to failure and possibly bankruptcy. But as a stranger now, I had no intention of getting involved. My life was going well, surrounded by a loving husband, respectable in-laws, and adorable children. Each day, I cherished the happiness of life, grateful for the true family I had found. You're just living off your parents at your age, Lily? Leeches like you should leave. This is going to be our house. Emily, my 8-year-old niece, said with a smirk. My sister Anne and her husband Sam chuckled beside her. I could tell what kind of parenting they were doing, judging by Emily's rude comment. I felt anger building inside me. My name's Lily, and I live with my parents in their house. I used to live on my own, but I moved back home because I was worried about my aging parents. I love my job, and I'm not interested in relationships. I never planned to get married. One reason I moved back home was to spend time with my parents. My dad used to be a chef, and he's still great at cooking. Even though he's retired, he cooks for us at home, and I love his meals. When I lived alone, I missed his cooking. So that's one reason I came back home, but I keep that to myself. When I moved back home, I decided to help out with the household. My mom retired from her part-time job, which she had for years. She was unsure about retiring, but I suggested it might be a good time. Both my parents have been doing physically demanding jobs, and I convinced them to quit, telling them they didn't need to push themselves anymore. Since I've been helping to support the household, I'm often a mess outside of work, and I'm not great at keeping the house tidy. That's why I appreciate that my parents are at home to take care of chores. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement between us. But disrupting the stable setup are my sister and her family. They show up almost every week, uninvited. They drive 30 minutes to our house and expect meals. My sister justifies it by saying it saves on their food expenses, so they come every week. She's aware that raising a child costs a lot, and her husband Sam doesn't deny it. They would eat the meals my dad cooked as if it was their entitlement, then leave without cleaning up. This became their weekly routine, and even though they just came, ate, and left, I might have tolerated it without getting angry. But my sister's other behaviors were unacceptable. Every time before leaving, Anne would rummage around our house, taking things she thought could be sold on an online flea market app. So I've had to hide my accessories and important clothes in the back of my closet. On top of that, she would go through our fridge, taking food ingredients without asking us. When I pointed out that it would be a crime if she were a stranger, she dismissed me, saying, "You wouldn't understand, Lily. It's tough to keep a household running when you're married." But Anne isn't the only selfish one. Emily, who inherited her mother's traits, has become more and more like her as she grew up. "Ew, this is gross," Emily would say, making a sour face at the meal my dad made. Neither Anne nor Sam would scold her. The meal was made by my dad, who's a retired chef, and it was always something to be proud of. But Emily complained, "I can't eat this, it's disgusting. I want cake." When Sam heard that Emily wanted cake, he turned to me and asked if we had any. Even I couldn't help but frown and respond, "Huh." Sensing potential trouble, my father quickly stepped between Sam and me, apologizing, saying, "Sorry, we didn't prepare any cake. Did you not enjoy today's meal, Emily?" Emily seemed rather displeased, saying, "It's always yucky. I only want to eat sweet things. Desserts are the best. I don't want to eat Grandpa's food." Though I found it convenient and cost-saving, if Emily said so, we had no choice. "Dad, Mom, please prepare some sweets and cake for Emily next week," Sam requested. I couldn't forgive my sister, Anne, for accepting Emily's selfishness as a matter of course and bossing our parents around. However, if I spoke out now, our already shrinking parents would feel even more troubled. I pitied them and couldn't bring myself to complain that day either, as Anne's family, as always, finished looking through our house. I couldn't believe the audacity, acting that way just because it's their parents' house. It was unforgivable. Exposing my anger, my mother apologized, saying it was her fault for not having the cake ready. "I'm sorry," she said, while my father silently discarded the leftover food prepared for Emily. My heart ached at the sight of my parents' actions. I spent the following week contemplating whether I should tell Anne and her family not to visit anymore, only to have them arrive at our home yet again without any notice, as if it were a matter of course. Anne's family walked in, asking, "Is dinner ready yet?" Emily complained about the cake my mother had bought, saying, "I prefer one with more strawberries." Sam changed the television channel without asking. Seeing my sister and her family doing as they pleased as usual, I was flabbergasted. When my father's cooking was ready, Anne and Sam were enjoying their meal, chatting, and even sharing a bottle of wine. Emily, dissatisfied with the cake we bought and refusing to eat a single bite of the meal, was playing a game on her smartphone, saying, "Grandpa and Grandma are really useless. I wish them to leave sooner." Suddenly, she cheerfully mentioned, "Oh right, we decided to move into this house from next week." My voice echoed with surprise, and it seemed that my parents, who hadn't heard this before, were equally shocked. Sam supplemented Anne's announcement, saying, "It's a hassle to drive here every week. Besides, if we live together, we can save even more on groceries, and we won't have to pay rent." Unable to utter a word, my parents stayed silent, and I finally objected. "Wait a minute, that's quite sudden. We don't have enough rooms, and you're planning to live here without contributing financially. That's way too presumptuous." Sam's face contorted at my words, but it was Emily, not them, who rebutted first. "Lily is an embarrassing adult who needs to move out anyway," Emily said, setting her smartphone on the table and staring at me defiantly. "What do you mean by I need to move out, Lily? Aren't you a parasite living off your parents at your age? Parasites should get out. This will be our house." Emily, sounding smug, received stifled laughs from Anne and Sam. For a moment, I wondered if an 8-year-old should talk this way. I had to do a double take with Emily, all of 8 years old, calling me a parasite. Based on the reactions of Anne and Sam, I assumed that they had indoctrinated their daughter to think of me in such derogatory terms. No, Emily, don't say such things. It'll hurt Lily's feelings, I heard my mother say. I don't want to live with Lily. I want her gone by next week. It's embarrassing to live with a parasite. What if my friends find out? Emily was looking at me as if I were garbage, while Anne and Sam were chuckling beside her. I felt a surge of anger after tolerating their behavior for so long. All right, as per your wishes, I will leave by next week. Rest assured, I responded. Anne's family seemed satisfied with my response, laughing as usual without helping clean up. My parents looked terrified at the prospect of living with Anne's family, but they were relieved when I proposed a solution. There was so much to do before Anne's family moved in. My parents helped out, and it was a great relief. The house had been tidied up, and the move was complete, just as little Emily asked. I effectively moved out of the house for them. The day arrived when Anne's family was supposed to move in. I was busy organizing myself in my new place. I missed my old house where I had lived for so many years, but the new place was nice, and I felt a sense of relief knowing that I wouldn't be irked every time Anne's family visited. While I was engrossed in cleaning and apparently trying to reach me on the phone, my phone rang again, showing numerous missed calls from Anne. I picked up. "Lily, why didn't you pick up earlier? There's a problem with our house," she cried. "Well, it's my house, actually. I've already demolished it," I said, half chuckling. "What have you done?" she screamed. I could only imagine their shock when they arrived to find the house in the midst of demolition. You see, when I had moved back to support my parents, the house was transferred to my name. It was my decision to demolish it. I figured it was better to knock it down than let Anne's family take it over. The house was old anyway, and my parents agreed with my decision. Emily's comments about me being a parasite were therefore greatly misguided. I explained all of this to Anne. "You and Emily have said a lot of wrong things about me. It's not good to educate your daughter like this. It'd be a pity if Emily turned out to be like you," I told her, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She seemed more shocked than anything else. She selfishly ran her mouth and then came to me almost in tears, asking, "What should we do? After all, we've already terminated our lease and moved out from our previous house. We're going to end up homeless." Emily's still only 8 years old. Maybe it's good for Emily to experience hardship. I responded casually while continuing to clean. Anne started crying, saying, "How could you be so heartless?" I thought that should be my line. Who was it that repeatedly insulted me through their own words and through their daughter? I asked her. "I'm sorry. I'll make Emily apologize too. Please, just for tonight. Let us stay in your new place," she begged. "No can do. Both Dad and Mom are now scared to meet you. You always say negative things. Our new home is fully accessible, and they both seem to like it. Please stop interfering with our happiness," I replied, hanging up the phone mercilessly. Afterwards, Anne kept calling numerous times, but I ignored her. It seemed like she also tried to reach out to our parents, but they too ignored her calls. Eventually, the relentless calls stopped. Presumably, Anne and her family managed to find a place to stay. When I wondered where they went, my mother explained the situation to Dad and me a few days later. Apparently, Anne had been sending messages to Mom via text only. It seems she's now staying with Sam's parents. Sam's mom, Anne's mother-in-law, is a very strict woman when it comes to rules and manners. Anne disliked her and appears to be struggling living under the roof of such a stern mother-in-law. Emily, too, who used to be spoiled rotten, seems to be learning a lot from this strict mother-in-law. There's no doubt she would have grown into a terrible adult if she continued her old ways. So, in retrospect, this seems to be a good thing. It may be tough on Emily, but it's unavoidable. I hope she'll manage to become a well-mannered grown-up. It seems Anne and Sam were more broke than we imagined. Sam was a fan of gambling, frequently squandering his money on various bets. Anne wasn't against gambling and didn't stop him, even enjoying it with him at times. However, they accumulated a substantial amount of debt due to their gambling. In order to repay this debt, it seems that they wanted to live with our parents. I was dumbfounded by how audacious their reason was. Sam ended up returning to his parents' house, but reportedly disappeared after a few days. Whether he ran away of his own accord due to being chased by debt collectors or was forcibly taken away to work, it was unclear. Regardless, since he left a note saying, "I'm leaving home. Please don't search for me." The police treated it as a case of him simply leaving home. Without any savings, he is now apparently working multiple jobs from dawn to dusk. Anne is sending daily messages to Mom about her hardships, but it seems Mom has no intention of helping Anne. "We raised her that way, but I think this is a necessary trial for her," Mom said. "For your information, our parents and Sam's parents are on good terms and frequently communicate." When Mom apologized to Sam's mom for the trouble caused by Anne and Emily, Sam's mom energetically responded, "Having these kids who are worth educating has added some spice to my life. I apologize for the trouble my son caused. As an apology, I'll make sure to educate my daughter-in-law and granddaughter well." Anyway, my parents and I are relieved to have cut ties with Anne and her family. We're relishing the fact that we can now spend our days without the constant dread and annoyance. Dad, who had lost some confidence in his cooking after Emily's criticism, is now joyfully showing off his culinary skills thanks to our new house with a spacious kitchen. I've always loved Dad's cooking, and every time I say delicious, he seems more motivated to cook. Mom, who used to get exhausted every time Anne's family visited and lost the energy to go outside, is now often going out since we moved. She joined a local club and resumed her old hobby of painting. My mom's forte is watercolor painting. She's always joyfully crafting her artwork under the gentle guidance of her teacher. Recently, she's been heading out to the park with a sketchbook in hand to draw various objects and scenes. We're eagerly looking forward to the upcoming exhibition by the art club my mom is a part of, and we plan to attend. My life continues as it always has, busy but enjoyable. As I continue doing the work I love, the constant nagging from my sister and her family has finally ceased, reducing my stress levels significantly. It wasn't until I felt this relief that I realized just how much stress they have been causing me. It's refreshing to remember just how bright and cheerful I can be. My parents are aging, but they are enjoying their lives now, which makes me happy. Even if they eventually need care, our home is equipped with accessibility features, making caregiving easier. Lily, thanks to you, we are so happy. We truly appreciate it, my mother-in-law often says. My father echoes her sentiments with a warm smile and a heartfelt thank you. In part, my devotion to my parents was born from a desire not to have regrets when the inevitable separation comes. However, seeing them so pleased is the greatest reward. I want to continue living this slow-paced, warm life and will do what I can to ensure our daily lives remain this way. I'm going through a divorce. My son's new wife, who just got married a few days ago, unexpectedly said these words to me. I was so surprised that I couldn't even respond. Just a few days ago, my son had an emotional wedding. They should be on their honeymoon right now. Instead, she's here alone, dropping this bombshell. I couldn't fathom what went wrong during their trip. Tears streamed down her face, and all I could do was watch as she fell apart in front of me. My name's Elizabeth, in my 50s, a homemaker who raised 2 sons. When they were young, I found out about my husband's affair, and we got divorced. Since then, I've been working tirelessly to raise my boys by myself. They're very different. My elder son, James, is bright, excelling in school, and later securing a scholarship to a prestigious university. He now has a good job at a major corporation and recently married a woman from his workplace. They seem happy together. But my younger son, Ethan, was more of a handful. In middle school, he fell in with a rough crowd, causing trouble and even starting a fire at school. I worked hard to get in through high school, where his rebellious streak continued. He graduated, but finding stability was a challenge. He bounced between jobs, never staying long. And he had a string of girlfriends, bringing them home often. I worried about him causing trouble or hurting others. It's been 5 years since high school, and I still wonder what will become of him. One day, Ethan came home for the first time in a while, saying he had something important to discuss. He announced that he was going to start taking work seriously. This wasn't the first time I'd heard such promises. "I've landed a job at a company, and they're offering me a full-time position," he said, seemingly aware that I might doubt him. Ethan went on to talk about the company he'd been accepted into, trying to convince me that he was serious this time. "Really? That's fantastic news," I responded, though I couldn't help but be surprised. Given the tough economic times, it seemed unlikely that a company would hire Ethan, who had only been doing part-time work. He explained that his current girlfriend, Michelle, had introduced him to the job. According to Ethan, Michelle's father owned the company, and she had helped him secure the position. While I should have been happy that my son had found stable employment, part of me couldn't shake off my skepticism. Ethan had a reputation as a ladies' man, and I couldn't help but wonder if he had manipulated Michelle to get the job. Ethan had a history of relying too much on women, and I'd warned him about it before. I hoped he wouldn't become a burden to Michelle. Despite my concerns, Ethan seemed to be genuinely committed to his work for the time being. In the past, he never stayed in a job for more than a few months. But Ethan surprised us all by sticking with the job for half a year, then a whole year. This might seem normal for most people, but for Ethan, who had a habit of jumping from one job to another, it was quite unexpected. Then, after 3 years of working there, Ethan and his girlfriend, Michelle, came to visit us with some big news. "Mom, we're getting married," Ethan casually announced. I had suspected this might be coming, seeing them together, but hearing about my mischievous son's marriage was still a surprise. "So, you two have decided on this?" I asked. Seeing them standing there with serious expressions, I didn't feel like opposing their decision. "I understand. It's the path you both chose. So move forward together," I said, accepting their marriage, albeit in a bit of a roundabout way. Then Michelle's eyes welled up with tears, and she began to speak. "Thank you so much. We'll work together to build a wonderful family," she said, looking at me intently as she made her vow with a trembling voice. I had been thinking for a while that she's a woman with a pure heart, too good for Ethan. "Michelle, take good care of my son," I said, expressing my gratitude for her support. The reason I was hearing this happy news today was because she had supported him all this time. I responded with a smile, moved to tears as big drops fell from her eyes. Seeing her wipe her eyes gently with a handkerchief, I felt like crying myself. I knew she had been taking care of Ethan, who still had a mischievous side to him. From the bottom of my heart, I thought Ethan was really lucky. "Ethan, make sure to make Michelle happy. From now on, you have to cherish her more than anything," I said, and Ethan nodded shyly. And so Ethan and Michelle were officially engaged. The wedding was simple yet solemn, with only family and close friends present. As I recalled various memories, I sincerely wished for them to support each other as lifelong partners. I truly hoped that Ethan could make Michelle, a selfless and devoted woman, happy. Shortly after their wedding, Ethan and Michelle decided to have their honeymoon within the country due to their savings, a sensible choice in my opinion. I expected Michelle to take charge of their marriage and keep Ethan, who used to be a playboy, in line. But my hopes turned to despair when 3 days into their honeymoon, Michelle unexpectedly showed up at my door. "Michelle, what happened? Weren't you on your honeymoon?" I asked, surprised to see her there, with Ethan nowhere to be found. With a drained expression, Michelle confessed, "Mother-in-law, I'm sorry. I have to divorce him." I was shocked. They had just gotten married, and now the bride was talking about divorce. "What happened? Did something occur with Ethan?" I asked, feeling hesitant. Michelle, after a moment of silence, softly revealed he was having an affair. I was speechless. This shouldn't be happening. Ethan, who had just vowed eternal love at their wedding, was cheating and secretly seeing his ex-girlfriend. During their honeymoon, of all times, Michelle started to cry as she recounted the painful discovery. I was at a loss for words. Introducing a mistress to your wife during your honeymoon, it was unthinkable. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could my son do such a terrible thing? Tears streamed down Michelle's cheeks, but they held a spark of hatred, contrasting sharply with the blissful sparkle she had just days ago. She had been betrayed by the one she loved. Michelle recounted the shocking events. Ethan's ex-girlfriend was staying at the same place they had chosen for their honeymoon. Ethan had called her there, inviting her to the hotel where they were staying. It was unthinkable. What was Ethan thinking? It must have been hard for you, Michelle. I'm truly sorry for what my son has done. I apologized, unable to understand Ethan's actions. As I hugged Michelle's trembling shoulders, I listened to her thoughts, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me. Unable to bear the pain unfolding before my eyes, I left the scene. When his mistress met Michelle, she must have flaunted their shameful relationship, causing Michelle even more distress. She seemed more confused and saddened than angry. Contrasting with Michelle's demeanor, my anger towards Ethan grew. How could he cause such distress to a woman who had always been his rock? I dialed Ethan's number in a fit of anger. Ethan, where are you right now? I asked, trying to remain calm. He answered carefreely, oblivious to the turmoil. I'm on my honeymoon, enjoying it with Michelle. Did you call just to interrupt us? Ethan replied, playing dumb. I was astounded. Did he not understand the gravity of the situation? Rallying myself, I raised my voice. Stop lying. Michelle is here with me. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, followed by Ethan's small surprise. Come back home right now, I instructed him firmly, demanding his immediate return. I suspected Ethan was trying to figure out how to handle the situation, even daring to lie at this point. My mind was made up. While on the phone with Ethan, I offered Michelle comforting words, unable to believe my own son could be so foolish. Even after telling her about the call, Michelle expressed that she didn't want to see Ethan right now, and understandably so. So I decided to handle Ethan myself for the time being. I called Michelle's parents to inform them of what happened, then drove Michelle back to her parents' house, where they were understandably furious. All I could do was apologize profusely on behalf of my foolish son. Exhausted upon returning home, I waited for Ethan to come back. When he arrived that night, he seemed troubled, wearing a poor smile. He probably still didn't understand the gravity of what he had done. Each time I looked at his face, my anger grew. Ethan, you've really messed up this time, I said sternly. His response was a look of annoyance, followed by a foolish grin. My ex-girlfriend said she's close by and wanted to see me, he explained, as if that might justify his actions, or even worse, as if he had given Michelle the wrong idea. But I wasn't buying it. Are you still seeing her? Did you really call her in the middle of your honeymoon? I asked, my words piercing through his excuses. Ethan, visibly embarrassed, admitted, well, we were only seeing each other occasionally. It was clear to me that even after breaking up with his ex and starting to date Michelle, Ethan had continued a physical relationship with his ex, a friend with benefits, as he put it. When I confronted him about it, Ethan shrugged it off, as if it were no big deal. Furthermore, when Ethan told his ex-girlfriend about marrying Michelle, she suggested the location of their honeymoon where she lived. Despite Michelle's reservations, Ethan took her advice, and as soon as they arrived, the woman insisted on meeting them. Whether she wanted to show off her connection with Ethan or flaunt her desirability, her actions upset Michelle. After hearing the whole story, I finally spoke to Ethan. I'm cutting our ties. You clean up your own mess. I'm not getting involved. It was a decision I had made when he lied to me. I had done more than enough to clean up after him, but he was a grown man now, and I had neither the inclination nor the patience to cover for him anymore. Ethan pleaded with me not to cut ties, but I stood firm. For a son who disregards his devoted wife and betrays people, the least I can do is this. You've betrayed someone you should have cherished. I told you countless times to make Michelle happy. I believed you had finally outgrown your bad habits, but I was mistaken. This is the only option left for me. He suddenly started crying and clinging to me, but I remained resolute. Things with Michelle probably won't just end with a divorce. You might lose your job too. Live alone for the rest of your life so no one else gets hurt. That's the only way you can atone. Soon after, Michelle blindsided Ethan with a divorce request. Evidence of their adulterous meetings from both their phones surfaced, and Ethan, faced with alimony demands, had no choice but to agree to the divorce. He was then laid off from the company owned by Michelle's father, likely in retaliation. Refusing to have anything to do with him, I pushed him away. But considering his character, he might ignore the alimony payments if left alone. So, as my duty as a parent, I introduced him to a job at a company run by an old friend, where the work is grueling. I made him promise to deduct the alimony payment from his salary. Despite feeling down about the incident, my other son James supported me. He gave me wonderful news. His wife was pregnant with twins. Eventually, they safely gave birth, and I joyfully became a grandmother. They decided to move next to me, giving me the gift of a peaceful life after the turmoil caused by Ethan. Now, I spend my days peacefully with my sweet grandchildren, grateful for the support of my eldest son and the joy they bring into my life. Family trips are more enjoyable without the daughter-in-law. She's just in the way. From the window of the speeding car, my mother-in-law looked down on me with a mocking smile. It all started on the first day of a family vacation with my husband's family. On the way to a luxury hotel, we stopped at a highway gas station, and suddenly I was left behind, all alone. I was completely lost and stood frozen on the spot, a moment I'll never forget. My name is Susan, I'm 30 years old, and I focus on housework, not working outside the home. My husband, Thomas, is a management consultant and often away from home. Since I spend a lot of time alone and my husband has been covering all of mother-in-law's living expenses since my father-in-law passed away, we decided to live with her in our home. Mother-in-law was thrilled that her only son was moving back home, but she seemed displeased that I, his wife, was coming along. I'm not glamorous, and I have no interest in designer brands. I do a lot of water-related chores, so even with care, my hands get rough, and I choose clothes that are easy to move in. To mother-in-law, I seemed like an embarrassing daughter-in-law to show others. Mother-in-law, Linda, has always been a show-off obsessed with appearance and brands. She's long since spent her grandfather's inheritance and her savings, but she has no intention of changing her luxurious lifestyle, always begging my husband for more. My husband always firmly refused, saying, "I'm giving you living expenses, not money for luxuries." But mother-in-law never gave up, always causing trouble. Furthermore, my sister-in-law and her husband live nearby. Sister-in-law, Jessica, has the same character as her mother, always making snide remarks like, "Thomas could do better than a plain woman like you." She comes to our house every day, demanding meals, baths, and drinks, but never contributes money or helps with chores. You're Thomas's wife, so it's only natural that you do all the housework. You're not good looking, so at least keep the house clean, she'd say. Thomas is too kind. Susan has always been poor and doesn't understand anything about brands. Mother-in-law would tell my husband, "I do all the housework myself," and sister-in-law would claim, "We're good friends." I've been working in customer service, so I've been using that experience to avoid major conflicts with mother-in-law and sister-in-law for the past few years. For years, my husband noticed everything, from me doing all the housework to my sister-in-law's terrible attitude. But he didn't confront them directly because I asked him not to. I wanted to avoid a complete breakdown with my husband's family, no matter what they did to me. My husband respected my feelings, but he'd often say, "You don't have to push yourself too hard. I'm okay with cutting ties and living separately." But I wanted to try a little harder, so I thought of planning a family trip to improve our relationship. When I proposed the idea, my husband agreed, saying, That sounds good. I can take time off next month, so let's all go on this year's trip. Since we were dating, my husband and I had been traveling regularly. Even after moving in with my mother-in-law, we enjoyed occasional trips just for the two of us. But once mother-in-law and my sister-in-law realized we were staying at luxury and famous hotels, they insisted on coming along. You two are so heartless, going on luxurious trips without us. From now on, take us with you and make sure it's extravagant, they demanded. Because they were so persistent, I told my husband that this time, we had booked a luxurious hotel for the whole family. Mother-in-law and sister-in-law were thrilled, but just before the trip, my husband's work made it impossible for him to join us. I thought about postponing the trip, but mother-in-law had already bragged to the neighbors about the souvenirs, so she insisted we couldn't change the plans. Reluctantly, I agreed to go with the four of us, excluding my husband. On the day of the trip, I put mother-in-law and sister-in-law's luggage in the trunk, and since there was no room left, I carried my travel bag inside the car. Throughout the drive, mother-in-law and sister-in-law kept making snide remarks from the back seat. Feeling fed up, I glanced at the empty passenger seat where only my travel bag sat, and I began to feel a little uneasy without my husband. Even as I drove onto the highway, mother-in-law's complaints never stopped. "You're driving so slowly. Are you just careless because Thomas isn't here?" she accused. "Really, there was an accident today. So you're just good at making excuses. You must have deceived Thomas the same way." "I didn't deceive anyone. If only slow Susan weren't here. This trip would be more fun, right, Mom?" Sister-in-law chimed in, echoing mother-in-law's sentiments. Indeed, eventually, as we were about to arrive at yet another gas station, sister-in-law surprisingly suggested that my husband drive the rest of the way. "You must be tired, Susan, having been forced to prepare mother-in-law's luggage and clean the house before our early departure," she remarked. Exhausted, I agreed. "Susan, could you buy drinks for everyone?" Mother-in-law asked as I got out of the car to switch drivers. She gave me a friendly smile, unlike her usual self. "Sure, that's fine," I replied. Mother-in-law and sister-in-law were unusually kind. Maybe they wanted to improve our relationship, just like I did. I felt relieved and was about to walk away from the car when suddenly the engine started and mother-in-law threw my luggage out of the car. Then, with a big smile, she yelled at me, "Family trips are more enjoyable without the daughter-in-law. You're just in the way." I stood there, watching the car drive away, leaving me and my travel bag behind. I was completely lost and stood still for a moment I will never forget. Finally, I realized that no matter how much I did for mother-in-law and sister-in-law, it was all in vain. I reached for my travel bag left in the parking space. My vision suddenly blurred, and surprised, I ran to the restroom, covering my eyes with a hand towel as tears began to flow uncontrollably. I don't remember how long I was there, but I noticed a call on my mobile phone and checked the message. It was from my husband, who had finished work early, expressing concern about the trip with mother-in-law and the others. While I was reading the message, my husband called. "Thomas, I'm alone at a highway gas station right now," I said between sobs. "What happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Hearing his voice, I couldn't help but cry again. He patiently listened to my explanation without rushing me. "I'm really sorry that Mom and the others did this to you. I'll come pick you up right away," he said. "I'm sorry this happened." "Why are you apologizing, Susan?" "Because I wanted to get along with your precious family, and I couldn't," I confessed. "I want you to tell me how you really feel. Do you still want to try to make things work with Mom and the others?" "Right now, I can only think that it's too difficult," I admitted. "I see. I'm sorry for what my family did. I'll handle the separation and everything else with Mom and the others." "But is it okay for you to leave your feelings as they are?" he asked. "My feelings? You've been holding back from me all this time, haven't you?" I realized. Thinking back, I realized that I had always been holding back. But I had been angry with my unreasonable mother-in-law and insensitive sister-in-law all this time. Yes, I can't be with those people I absolutely hate, I declared. Expressing the anger I had been suppressing felt surprisingly refreshing. You can do whatever you want from now on, Susan. I'll take care of the rest, my husband assured me. I understand. No matter what happens, I won't let them hurt you anymore. I made that firm resolution, I said determinedly. A few hours later, my husband came to pick me up at the gas station. Being with him made me naturally smile. And I realized how calmly and happily we could spend time together, even though we were traveling the same distance. I couldn't help but grin a little, even though I felt bad for my worried husband. Thanks to his thoughtful care, I was able to rest well. When we got home, the next day, my husband made a surprising proposal. I've narrowed down the options for our new home to places near Susan's parents' house, he announced. What? What's going on all of a sudden? I asked, taken aback. I want to make sure we're not bothered by Mom and the others, so let's finish moving during the 3 days of the trip, he explained. Will it be difficult for you to move, Susan? He asked, his smile masking any frustration he might have felt. My careful and planned husband would never do something so sudden. I felt that he was quite angry inside, but he had a lovely smile for me. I'm all for moving. Let's get started right away, I replied enthusiastically. We quickly found a new home and moving company, and we were able to move without any problems. During this time, I received several emails from mother-in-law and the others. We're having the best trip without you. The hotel is luxurious and wonderful. Make sure it's at this level next time, one email read. Dinner was the most extravagant and delicious ever. It's even more fun without seeing Susan's ugly face. Traveling with just the family is so much more relaxing. The jacuzzi is amazing, another email boasted. Their enjoyment of the luxurious time at the high-end hotel came through clearly. I was looking forward to what would happen next. At around 10:00 a.m. on the checkout day, as expected, I received a call from mother-in-law. Susan, what's going on? What do you mean? She demanded. They told me the accommodation fee is $10,000. If the young lady isn't there, it's completely different from what you told us at first, she continued. It's only natural that the regular accommodation fee applies since I booked it through my connections, and I'm not there, I explained. What do you mean? That hotel is run by my relatives, she explained. Well, I didn't know that. By the way, all the hotels we've stayed at on our trips were run by those relatives, so we were able to stay at a discount, I replied. Susan, you've never told us that before, she accused. Thomas told me to keep quiet about it because if Linda and the others found out, they'd demand it be free, I confessed. Anyway, the accommodation fee is correct, so please pay it yourself, she demanded. Wait a minute. I can't pay $10,000. I didn't go on the trip, so I can't pay for you all, I protested. Don't say that. Do something. We're family, right? You said the wife of your son isn't family, didn't you? You all enjoyed yourselves as a family, so please pay as a family, she pleaded. Goodbye, I said, hanging up. I ignored mother-in-law, who was still yelling on the other end of the phone, and hung up, feeling refreshed. In the end, mother-in-law and the others borrowed money from a shady source to pay for the accommodation or something like that. Furthermore, when they returned home, they couldn't get living expenses from my husband or me since we had moved, and they ended up fighting and parting ways with sister-in-law's family. Sister-in-law's family also deteriorated their relationship and divorced. Sister-in-law, abandoned by her husband and without income, looked for work in the nightlife but seemed to have trouble finding employment due to her bad personality. With no one left to rely on, mother-in-law even went to my husband's company to seek help. At that time, mother-in-law looked older than her age, with hollow eyes, a haggard face, and dirty clothes. Even when she was crying and begging in the company lobby to live with us, my husband firmly declared a break in relations. After that, mother-in-law ended up working exhaustively at a terrible job. Several years have passed, and now we have a lovely child and are living very happily. We are planning to stay at that luxury hotel we couldn't go to before, just the three of us as a family. The hotel owner's relative invited us because they want to meet our child. We are looking forward to it very much.
I never imagined my grandson would have a developmental disorder. He's like a broken toy, just useless. He's not good enough for our family. The moment my father blurted out those words, the atmosphere froze. It happened at my sister's funeral. She had been raising her son, who has a developmental disorder, as a single mother. But she passed away, leaving him behind. My parents were just talking nonsense. They were completely out of place, as if an invisible wall had been built around them, causing people to drift away. I didn't want my sister's son to hear what such people were saying. Thinking this, I covered his ears with my hands and glared at my parents. However, the two of them continued to talk about their selfish opinions without paying any attention to the surroundings. Take care of him yourself. We have no intention of dealing with him. Yes, that's right. Being infertile and not having kids isn't so bad when you have him. That made me so angry. My head was about to explode. I was already planning on taking care of him. I couldn't entrust him to people who could only think in such a biased way. Of course, we'll take care of raising him. We will definitely raise him with love, and we will cut ties with you. As my husband and I said this strongly, my parents left with a sneer, unaware of what they would face. As time passed, my name is Julia. I'm 30 years old, a working housewife living with my kind-hearted husband Nick, who is 1 year older than me. We don't have children. We had talked about wanting children before we got married, but it didn't happen. After tests, it was revealed that I have a condition that makes it difficult for me to get pregnant. We discussed for days whether to undergo treatment, but Nick said, "I'm happy as long as I can live happily with you, even without children. So I don't want you to worry too much." And my in-laws also said, "We just want you both to be happy. Yes, we will support whatever you two decide." I remember them saying kindly, which made me burst into tears. Until then, I had felt sorry for Nick and my in-laws. But hearing them, I thought, maybe I don't need to feel guilty since my family, Nick and my in-laws said it's okay not to have children. That's fine. As I came to think that way, my worries lessened and I feel more at ease. However, the worry did not completely disappear. The reason lies with my parents. They are concerned about what others think and always brought up the topic of children every time we met. Nick and my in-laws understand, so we plan to live together without kids. Even when I explain this, they would say, "Don't you want to repay us by giving us grandkids?" Or, "What will we do when our neighbors ask, 'Hasn't your eldest daughter had any children yet?'" Nick also tried to explain, but they wouldn't listen. "You're really a failure. I wish you would learn from your sister Erica." My parents always compared me with my sister Erica, who was 1 year younger than me. They favored her over me from the beginning, and the issue with children seemed to accelerate that. Erica was not only smart but also athletic and liked by everyone around her. She never bragged about her abilities, always humble and with good character. I liked her too, and we had a good relationship as sisters. I hardly got in touch with my parents, but Erica and I occasionally kept in touch. She has a son named David, now 6 years old. As he grew, it became apparent that he had a developmental disorder. That was the reason she had divorced her husband. "Sis, please keep this a secret from Mom and Dad," Erica said to me, considering their unusual concern for appearances. Who knows what they would say if they found out about David's developmental disorder? Of course, I agreed. While keeping David a secret from our parents, I have been helping her raise her child as a single mother. Then one day, I received a call from the police on my smartphone. "Are you Erica's sister? It's about your sister." After seeing that, the female police officer on the other end of the line fell silent, as if troubled. Something didn't feel right, and even though it wasn't hot, I was still sweating like crazy as my heart raced, and I tried to calm myself. She continued, "Erica has died in an accident." After inhaling sharply, I found myself unable to speak, my mouth hanging open with a mind gone blank. I somehow managed to convey what the police had said to Nick. He placed a hand on my shoulder, repeating Erica's name in an attempt to calm me amidst his own shock. Time quickly passed in a blur due to funeral preparations, and before we knew it, it was the night before the wake. Even then, I couldn't fully grasp that she was no longer in this world. I kept thinking she might call me the next day or that she might come over and have dinner with Nick and me again. I was preoccupied with such thoughts. I wondered whose funeral I was attending, though it felt like a dream. There was no mistake that Erica's name was present in the funeral hall, her portrait framed and displayed. Ah, is she really gone? While I was mourning with Erica's friends, I heard a voice echo through the funeral hall. Look who decided to show up, our daughter who let us down. You still haven't managed to have a kid. I couldn't understand how they could say such things at their own daughter's funeral. My parents were acting like they couldn't see how upset everyone was and just kept insulting me. Friends and relatives looked at my parents with disbelief, clearly seeing the absurdity in their words. It was evident to everyone there that my parents were out of place, saying such bizarre things. However, being in public and grieving Erica's absence made me feel as if my heart was being torn apart. Not just Julia, it seems Erica was an embarrassment as well. All our affection for her seems foolish now. I never thought my grandson would have a developmental disorder. He's like a broken toy, just useless. He's not good enough for our family. My parents were just babbling nonsense. They were completely out of place, as if an invisible wall had been built around them, causing people to drift away. I didn't want my sister's son to hear what such people were saying. Thinking this, I covered his ears with my hands and glared at my parents. Take care of David yourself. We have no intention of dealing with him. Yes, that's right. Being infertile and not having kids isn't so bad when you have him. That made me so angry. My head was about to explode. I was already planning on doing that. I couldn't entrust him to people who could only think in such a biased way. Of course, we will take responsibility for raising this child. We will definitely raise him with love, and we will cut ties with you. After saying that, my parents briefly looked shocked but then scoffed. Oh, do as you please, and left the scene. 10 years later, David had turned 16. Although he initially seemed unsure and out of place living with us, he now appeared completely at ease. Having hit his growth spurt, he had grown rapidly, surpassing my height. David is not quite as tall as Nick yet, but he's getting there. He's growing like crazy. One day after work, Nick told me about a weirdo lurking near our place. He seemed pretty stressed out. Nick described seeing a person wearing a deep hooded parka, unable to discern their gender or age, looking like they were searching for someone. If you go out, Julia, please be careful, Nick advised. Heeding the advice, I was cautious about my surroundings for a few days when going out. However, I didn't encounter the suspicious individual Nick had mentioned. Perhaps they were no longer in the area. Just when I had let my guard down, on my way home from shopping, that person appeared in front of my house. 2 individuals were sitting boldly. Could they be thieves? No, that would be too conspicuous. Wondering about their purpose, I was about to reach for my smartphone to possibly call the police when they shouted, "Julia, is that you? We've been looking for you." I nearly dropped my smartphone in surprise. I managed to pocket it and look toward the duo who had called out. The hoods fell back, revealing without a doubt the faces of my parents. Having cut ties and not heard from them in 10 years, I never expected to see them again, especially coming to see me. Curiously, I looked at them wondering what they wanted. When did you build a house without telling us? If you have that kind of money, you should give some to us. You're such an ungrateful daughter, can't you think of us? I was dumbfounded by what they said. Indeed, my parents had been ostracized by their friends, colleagues, and relatives due to their appalling behavior at Erica's funeral. That makes sense. They were pointing fingers instead of understanding, which made them seem like heartless jerks to everyone, especially at my father's company where his usual arrogance had already spread bad rumors. Nobody doubted the rumors because it was typical of him to do something unreasonable. As a result, he was naturally moved to a less significant department. Somehow he managed to work there for 10 years but had recently opted for early retirement and became unemployed. So you're saying you're short on money, but you should have received a severance package. My father looked down, shaking his head in frustration. He had quickly squandered his severance pay and savings. However, I was more resigned than surprised. He had always been prone to wasting money, buying unnecessary things, and letting them collect dust. Even when I lived at home, presumably he had spent all his money, forgetting about the future lack of income, and came to rely on me when he realized he had no money for living expenses. I reported a failure like you until you were an adult, so it's only natural for you to repay us for those expenses. Faced with my father's illogical arguments, I instinctively put my hand to my forehead and sighed. Their refusal to consider getting jobs themselves was characteristically selfish in a bad way. How come you didn't pay us back before building your house? Your son, David, is a disaster. but you're still taking out a mortgage," my mother ran nonsensically. However, they seem to be misunderstanding something. "We didn't take out any mortgage, though." "What?" My mother tilted her head, looking confused. I glanced at my father, who mirrored her expression. "This house was made possible thanks to David." "What do you mean?" I decided to explain the whole story to my parents. David got really good at coding and used his ability to focus to make apps online. He had been interested in machines since he was young, often intently observing the family computer. Originally, I worked from home using a computer, and one day, seeing me, he expressed a desire to try it too. So I let him start with simple games. As he deepened his knowledge and got his own computer, he became even more engrossed. One of his apps became a hit, allowing us to lead a comfortable and happy life. Of course, not all the app's earnings were spent on buying the house. Most of it was saved. We plan to use it for David's education and living expenses so he can focus on what he loves. "Well, if he's such an amazing kid, you should have said so earlier." Suddenly, my mother's attitude changed drastically, and she began to speak in a sweet voice. She put on a forced smile, with her lips trembling slightly, while my father made exaggerated hand gestures. "A failure like you can't possibly nurture David's talent. We'll take him in." Had they forgotten what they said at Erica's funeral? Seeing their sickening behavior was unbearable. "What are you talking about? You were saying horrible things before." My parents closed in on me step by step as I retreated. With no passersby around, there was no one to call for help. Just as I was casting my gaze around, wondering what to do. "What are you doing?" Nick's cold voice resonated. Before I knew it, he was standing beside me, effectively putting an arm around my shoulder. "Shut up, let us see David." "That won't be possible, please go home." His resolute demeanor momentarily intimidated my parents, but they quickly regained their composure, glaring sharply and demanding to be let into the house. "Stop, if you plan to stay here any longer, I'm calling the police." With that, my parents reluctantly left. However, I couldn't shake the feeling that they wouldn't give up so easily. My predictions soon proved accurate as they reappeared several days later, dressed in the same suspicious parkas, making me rub my eyes in déjà vu. This time. However, there was a particular reason why we had planned to meet them, so their arrival was actually convenient. "Let us in, we want to see David," they demanded over the intercom. Seemingly taken aback when I promptly let them in, looking somewhat bewildered, they walked into our home as if it were their own, inspecting everything from the television in the living room to the vase, Nick's collection of mangas, and the shelf filled with David's programming books. They touched everything without permission, displaying an irritating sense of entitlement. "I've made some coffee for you, please take a seat." It was only after I invited them to sit that they finally stopped their invasive inspection and settled down at the dining table. My parents sat side by side with me, David and Nick opposite at them. I was anxious they might try to pull David away if he sat at the end. "You know why we're here today, right?" "It's about David, of course. We knew that's what they were here for." Nick and I stiffened our expressions. "Since we accepted you to take in David despite your infertility, he should at least pay us a reward." If we hadn't said anything, someone with a terrible personality like yours wouldn't have fought to take him in, right? I wanted to retort that the one with a terrible personality was them. After all, weren't they the ones who had no intention of taking David in? I still remembered the harsh words they had spewed at the funeral. They had clearly stated they had no intention of caring for David. Nick, with his good memory, must remember it just as I do. "Come on, David, why don't you live with us? We raised your mother, Erica, with so much love." My mother began to fervently describe how much love they had poured into Erica since she was a child. How they never got angry at her, bought her books, toys, clothes, and accessories, anything she wanted. How they celebrated her birthdays with grand parties at home. I remembered what my mother recounted, but also remembered how she would unfairly lash out at me as if I were to blame for something I hadn't done, and how I never received proper gifts from them. Erica seemed troubled by their favoritism too. When I was unjustly scolded in her place, she would cry and apologize, saying, "I'm sorry, sis, it's my fault." And on occasions like my birthday, she would secretly celebrate with me, gifting me cute hair accessories or cosmetics she bought with her allowance. Erica realized something was wrong with our parents' behavior and grew up normally and kind without being influenced by their mindset. Apparently, my parents mistook this as a result of their good parenting. See, just like I raised Erica to be such a gentle child, I'll raise you the same way. My parents poured their hopeful gaze into David. However, he made a puzzled face and said to me and Nick, "Who are these people?" It had been 10 years since he last saw them, and perhaps due to their lack of money, their appearances had drastically aged and became unkempt, making it understandable that he didn't recognize them. Shocked by being forgotten, my parents were speechless, their mouths opening and closing without words. Frozen, leaning forward at the table, Nick handed them something. My father, noticing it first, slowly turned his gaze and opened the envelope to pull out its contents. "What? How did you get this?" My mother, prompted by my father's surprised voice, looked over, and they both saw documents proving their gambling debts. Nick had suspected their identities as the suspicious individuals from the beginning and had hired a detective agency to investigate. "We cannot hand over David to you, not just because of your financial instability due to deaths, but also because you're not trustworthy as individuals." Nick's tone was stern, a rarity when he speaks to his elders, conveying his anger. "Besides, we've already cut ties, right? So we owe you nothing." Nick nodded firmly in agreement. "Stay away from our precious son, David." Intimidated by his assertiveness, my parents collapsed from their chairs with a clatter. They didn't seem to hurt themselves badly, but struggled to stand up due to their weakness. "Damn it, why are you all so ungrateful?" With those parting words, they finally left. Nick and I watched them leave and then hugged David tightly, relieved. Later, we heard the parents had to sell their house to pay off their debts. "Please let us stay for a while. We have nowhere to go." They had asked relatives and acquaintances, but no one would take them in. Their behavior at the funeral had spread, and no one wanted to invite such unreasonable people into their homes for fear of what they might do. That's what they deserved. They came to us, but we firmly refused. "We prefer if you didn't involve us any further. As I've said before, we've cut ties with you. It was your decision to accept this, so we're under no obligation to provide you with money or a place to live." With that, they left with a look of despair and have not returned since. We told them we'd call the cops if they came back, and that seemed to scare them off. Without a place to stay, they began living almost like homeless people, unable to secure a job due to their age and surviving day to day on short-term jobs. There was this middle-aged couple scanning job listings at the grocery store, but I left before I could figure out if they were my parents. They couldn't afford their phone bills anymore and had to cancel their smartphones. I've changed my number just in case, ensuring they can't contact us anymore. We no longer have to fear the doorbell or phone ringing. The three of us now live in peace. I continue my work from home, and David is next to me, working on his computer, developing new apps. He always happily shares his progress with me and Nick. I wonder if he'll tell us about his next app completion. I look forward to it and can't wait to see what he creates next. Together with Nick, I'm committed to nurturing David's talents further.